Chapter 391. Greenwood Peak towered into the clouds, shaped like a towering tree. The mountain was densely covered with a type of broadleaf trees, each of which stood 1,000 feet tall and were extremely thick. When a strong wind blew past, it seemed as if the mountain was shaking along with the wind, producing loud noises of waves. That was why it was named Greenwood Peak. There were 4 huge underground energy veins, which converged at the foot of Greenwood Peak according to the 4 cardinal directions. A small energy-condensing immortal ascension ball was connected to the 4 energy veins, transforming 70% of the energy in them into immortal energy that contained a slight element of greenwood. All the immortal energies were gathered at the top of the peak, where immortal green staff usually cultivated in seclusion, while the rest of the energies were drifting in the surroundings, nourishing Greenwood Peak with rich earth energy and making all sorts of exotic flowers and grasses look extraordinarily beautiful. Apart from Patriarch Jiang Yun, there were tens of other inner sect disciples serving immortal green staff. However, apart from Taoist Li, who had attained the 36th tier heaven immortal realm, none of the other inner sect disciples had made any significant progress. On the contrary, Patriarch Jiang Yun, an outer sect disciple who was forced to leave Yuan Hua sect 100,000 years ago, had attained the righteous fruit of heaven immortal. As a result, apart from the abode on the peak where immortal green staff usually stayed and cultivated, there were 2 other abodes on the left and right side of Greenwood Peak. One belonged to Taoist Li, and the other newly built abode belonged to Patriarch Jiang Yun. In Patriarch Jiang Yun's abode, Peppermint and Angelica were lying on a bamboo bed. With a cold face, Princess Zhonglu was smearing a medicinal ointment on their backs, which were covered in layers of scars, both new and old. The medicinal ointment was personally prepared by Wu Qi. But, just like the medicinal ointment he used to treat Yan Bugui, Wu Qi only pursued a strong and outstanding medicinal effect, and never paid attention to the method of administering medicine. Therefore, although the medicinal ointment was very strong, it was also very irritating. Every time the medicinal ointment touched the bloody wounds, Peppermint and Angelica felt as if they were being heavily slashed by someone. Even though the medicinal ointment concocted by Wu Qi was a life-saving spirit medicine, it was no different from being tortured. But Peppermint and Angelica, who had a petite body and a childish face, did not even let out a snort. Their tiny bodies were trembling violently, but their hands were holding tightly onto Princess Zhongli's skirt. Wu Qi stood by the bamboo bed and frowned as he looked at the 2 girls who were in so much pain that their foreheads were dripping with cold sweat. After a long time, he said, "Zi Xian, these 2 girls are not bad. You should accept them as your disciples. Their aptitudes are extremely good. I've checked them, and they all have top-grade water spirit veins." As for the supreme-grade water element root, Wu Qi happened to have the Dark Een water scripture he obtained from Lady Dark Goldwater. It was a supreme scripture that could allow him to cultivate all the way to the 1st tier of Gold Immortal Realm safely. On top of that, he also had the Dark Een energy vase, which could absorb water element energies and turn them into various acquired water to aid his cultivation. With the aptitudes of Peppermint and Angelica, they were the perfect candidates to inherit the cultivation technique Wu Qi obtained. Naturally, Princess Zhonglu would do whatever Wu Qi said. She nodded her head and said in a cold voice, "Peppermint Angelica, from now on, you're my disciples. Don't ever be bullied by anyone again. If anyone dares to bully you, just go ahead and kill them. Those who provoke my disciples will have their entire family wiped out." Wu Qi cleared his throat and interrupted Princess Zhongli's words. They were not in Great Yan Dynasty, and it was not so easy to have someone's entire family wiped out. Princess Zhongli's face blushed slightly. She gave Wu Qi a fierce glare, and only then did she continue to apply the ointment on the backs of the 2 girls. Upon hearing Princess Zhongli's words, the 2 sisters, who had been enduring the pain from the ointment and refusing to make a sound, suddenly burst into tears. They hugged Princess Zhongli's waist tightly with both hands and kept calling out, "Master." Wu Qi felt sad at the sight, and kept frowning. Standing next to him, Lord Xianxing and Catfish Flood Dragon shook their heads. They did not have the rich emotions of human beings. Standing next to them, Immortal Greenstaff and Patriarch Jiang Yun snorted angrily at the same time. Immortal Greenstaff clenched his jaws and said, "I can't believe someone dares to hurt the disciples that Lao Tzu has asked to be sent to Palace of Spirit Herbs. We'll settle this score with White Sparrow later. Damn it, don't let Lao Tzu find out who sent White Sparrow to Palace of Spirit Herbs. Sooner or later, Lao Tzu will break White Sparrow's legs." With a gloomy face, Patriarch Jiang Yun snorted coldly and said, "Master, let me handle this. How could they hurt two obedient little girls? How shameless, despicable, and obscene. Do they still deserve to be Yuan Hua sect's disciples?" Taoist Li was in the room as well. He stood 5 feet tall, had a lean face, and was in high spirits. Clad in a long brown robe made of linen, Taoist Li squeezed the rattan staff in his hand, clenched his jaws and said, "Master, junior brother, this is easy to handle. Many of Uncle Master Kuang's disciples are working in the pill workshop, and I'm in charge of them. I'll find some time to give them some mistakes, then punish them severely according to the sect rules." Taoist Li's pair of green eyes darted back and forth like a cat's. He clenched his jaws and said, "As long as we give them a slight accident when they are concocting pills, causing the pill cauldron to explode, they will be severely wounded even if they don't die from the explosion. Then, we'll charge them with carelessness in concocting pills and extravagance. The heart cleaning pool at the back of the mountain will be waiting for them." Immortal Greenstaff slapped Taoist Li's head forcefully and said with a smile, "That's what we'll do. Next month, you'll ask those rascals to concoct the Tri-Gold Flaming Dragon Tiger Energy Explosion Pill. This is the pill that will cause the most serious explosion if something goes wrong. If we're going to explode, we'll make sure to do it with more force. What's the big deal if they are seriously wounded?" Immortal Greenstaff clenched his teeth and said ferociously, "They can do it, but we can't? Lao Tzu has been holding back his anger for 100,000 years. Now, let's have a good competition with them, and let's see who can't beat the other." Standing off to a side with his hands clasped behind his back, Wu Qi raised his head and gave Immortal Greenstaff and Taoist Li a look. He suddenly fell in love with these two old Taoists. Clearing his throat, Wu Qi lowered his voice and said hypocritically, "But, Ancestral Master, Uncle Master, didn't the sect rules say that Yuan Hua sect's disciples are strictly forbidden to do that to each other?" Immortal Greenstaff and Taoist Li gave Wu Qi a glare at the same time, then cursed at the same time, "Sect rule my ass." They were taken aback at the same time. Immortal Greenstaff cleared his throat and clasped his hands behind his back, putting on a dignified look. Taoist Li's eyes went wide as he pointed his finger at Patriarch Jiang Yun and said, "Sect rule is dead, but people are alive. If the sect rule is always effective, junior brother Jiang Yun would have become an inner sect disciple 100,000 years ago. Why would he be chased out of Yuan Hua sect?" Stroking his beard, Taoist Li smiled reservedly and said, "In short, the application of sect rule depends on your heart. It all depends on how you use it." Clang. The door of the house was kicked open with a loud thud. A tall and slender lady clad in a green palace dress walked into the house. Her face was veiled with a light veil, and her face could not be seen clearly. Every step she took was filled with an alluring charm. Immediately after that, the lady's voice, which sounded a little hollow and hoarse, rang out, "What? Are those people stirring up trouble on purpose? It has been 100,000 years, are they done with it? Taoist Min, that old pig, doesn't he care about his face anymore? I can marry whoever I want to marry. Is he still going to pester me?" She stomped her foot forcefully. Rumble. Greenwood Peak began to tremble violently. It was as if a large patch of forest near the foot of the mountain was struck by a thunderbolt. Several thousand towering trees were uprooted, and countless tree barks and wood chips were blasted tens of miles away. All the birds and beasts in the forest fled in panic, not daring to stay any longer near Greenwood Peak. Immortal Greenstaff and Taoist Li bent their bodies at the same time in a nearly servile manner, carefully stepping forward to greet the lady. Immortal Greenstaff called her wife, with a flattering smile, while Taoist Li kept bowing and calling her master's wife, with a flattering smile on his face. The green-clothed lady did not pay any attention to Immortal Greenstaff and Taoist Li. Instead, she went straight before Patriarch Jiang Yun and gave him an appraising look. Suddenly, she sighed heavily and said, "Jiang Yuner, you did live up to my expectations in those years. You've chopped off White Sparrow's arm with just one sword strike. But I've made things difficult for you, as you were chased out of the sect because of this. Here are a few immortal items that I've bought for you over the years. Take them and refine them." The green-clothed lady flipped her palm, and 3 lower-grade immortal items appeared before Patriarch Jiang Yun, glinting faintly. They were a sword, a shield, and a Taoist crown. Judging from the runes flashing and blinking on them from time to time, although they were only lower-grade immortal items, they were the best among all lower-grade immortal items. At least, the person who crafted them must have put in a lot of effort. Trembling, Patriarch Jiang Yun dropped to his knees and received the 3 immortal items respectfully. Disciple Jiang Yuner thanks Master's wife for the generous gift. Wu Qi and Princess Zhang Le followed Patriarch Jiang Yun and dropped to their knees as well. This fiery and shrewish lady was none other than Immortal Greenstaff's dual cultivation partner, Goddess Green Melon. Many years ago, Taoist Min had taken a fancy to her and had forced her to marry him. In the end, Goddess Green Melon ran away with Immortal Greenstaff, slept with him, and succeeded in dual cultivation. It was a heavy slap on Taoist Min's face. The conflict between Taoist Qi and Taoist Min, and even Patriarch Jiang Yun's departure from Yuanhua sect, all started from this incident. But he did not expect that Goddess Green Melon was still thinking about Patriarch Jiang Yun, and had even bought him 3 lower-grade immortal items. What Wu Qi saw in Eminent Cloud Sect's Luo Ling Pavilion was only a lower-grade immortal item, which proved that not everyone in Puyo Heavenly Realm could easily get their hands on an immortal item. Yet, Goddess Green Melon had been thinking about Patriarch Jiang Yun, and had prepared 3 immortal items for him over the past 100,000 years. It was a good thing to have a senior in the sect. Wu Qi took a deep breath. Suddenly, he found the feeling he had when he was with Wu Wang in those years. It was the warm feeling of being watched over and protected, and having someone to shelter him from the wind and rain. It was a good thing to have a senior in the sect. Wu Qi's pupils constricted to the size of a needle tip. He swore to himself that no matter who tried to destroy this warm feeling that he missed so much, no matter who it was, he would have to kill them. He bowed respectfully at Goddess Green Melon and said in a deep voice, "Disciple Wu Qi offers greeting, Grand Mistress." Goddess Green Melon hurried forward and pulled Patriarch Jiang Yun up, then helped Wu Qi and Princess Zhang Le to their feet. She gave Wu Qi a look, nodded her head, and praised him. After that, she focused all her attention on Princess Zhang Lu and said, "Zixian, this little girl is indeed a peerlessly beautiful girl. She is truly like a celestial being. Wu Qi is not a good match for you. But as long as you like him, it's fine." Wu Qi was depressed by Goddess Green Melon's words, while Princess Zhang Le gave him a complacent glance and chuckled softly. Goddess Green Melon's movement was a little too big, and brought up a gust of wind. The veil covering her face fluttered a little, and as he stood aside, Wu Qi happened to see half of Goddess Green Melon's face. Her facial bones were broken, and her face was full of bumps and hollows, like the sand in a river that had been hit by raindrops. It was a very ferocious look. Wu Qi gasped. Immortal Greenstaff had told him that Goddess Green Melon's face was injured, and now that he saw it, it was indeed a very serious injury. No wonder this was the first time Goddess Green Melon came to see Patriarch Jiang Yun after he came to Greenwood Peak for so long. All girls cared a lot about their appearance. Presumably, Goddess Green Melon had been in a secluded cultivation these days, trying to heal the injury on her face. However, the injury was too serious, and unless she had an excellent healing spirit pill, it would be very difficult for her to fully recover. As for the 2 7th-grade immortal pills concocted by Patriarch Jiang Yun, he had given them to Patriarch Yuanhua. Chapter 392. After setting up the restrictive spell, Wu Qi fished out the Dark Yin energy vase and cast a few incantation gestures into it, changing the restrictive spell in the vase. As long as it could absorb enough water element energy, It would be able to produce the Ling Yi true water. As soon as Wu Qi activated the vase, its pale green body flickered with a bright light and gradually turned silver white, with a few images of swaying daffodils emerging on its surface. As soon as Goddess Green Melon appeared, she dominated the atmosphere in the room. Immortal Green Staff bowed his head, Taoist Li dared not to raise his head, Patriarch Jiang Yun bowed his head respectfully, and Princess Zhang Le could do nothing but listen. As Peppermint and Angelica were too young, they dared not to make a sound. There was no need to explain the importance girls attached to their appearance. After waiting on the tree for a few hours, the dark Yin energy vase trembled slightly, and a stream of silver-white liquid filled with cold air and abundant energy rushed out. Hastily, Wu Qi used a jade vase to store the liquid. There were over 50 kilograms of Ling Yi true water in the vase, enough to turn 80 to 100 ugly girls into stunning beauties. Although dragon pythons of fire and ice had a strong fleshly body like heavenly dragons, they were much more brutal and brutal. If dragons were the emperors of the scaled clans, then dragon pythons of fire and ice were the heroes of the scaled clans. If real dragons were to fight with dragon pythons of fire and ice, it would usually be the true dragons who would be defeated. Fairy Green Melon's face was injured by the starlight orb. Apart from using spirit pills and miraculous medicines to heal her injuries as soon as possible, he had another way to restore her appearance. The dark Yin energy vase could absorb water element energy and transform it into 99 types of acquired water. Among these acquired waters, there was a type of Ling Yi true water, which could especially nourish the Yin blood energy of a girl. It could maintain one's appearance, harmonize one's qi and blood, and provide a great support to female cultivators. Fairy Green Melon spoke very quickly. She sounded like a heavy machine gun, and there was a fiery crispness to her words. She gave Patriarch Jiang Yun 3 immortal items, then pulled Princess Zhang Lu aside and chatted for a while. At last, she rested her attention on Peppermint and Angelica. Apparently, she had learned about what happened to Peppermint and Angelica from other disciples. She comforted the two girls with a few words, then began cursing Priest Yun's disciples. Silverhorn stuck out his long tongue and licked one of his eyeballs, then murmured, "But, for the delicious, sweet and intoxicating human flesh, brother, we have to cultivate hard. 10 days, just 10 days, and we will be able to digest the food in our stomachs. Our cultivation should be able to reach the primordial spirit realm. Once we form our nascent divinities, we'll be able to inherit the secret arts of the dragon pythons of fire and ice in our bloodlines and begin our real cultivation." After Goldhorn and Silverhorn brothers were assigned, Wu Qi grabbed Long Yuan and whispered with him for a while. According to Long Yuan, the space in the spirit breeding ring was getting more and more limited, as the cultivation base of Longbow people was getting higher and higher, and their bodies were getting bigger and bigger. They needed more space. As Wu Qi was not a heaven immortal now, he did not have the power to create his own world, so he could only keep expanding the spirit breeding ring. The clan of dragon pythons had their own divine abilities and mystic arts inherited from their bloodlines, and they were definitely not weaker than the body-tempering techniques of the dragons. Only now did Wu Qi understand why Goldhorn and Silverhorn had only asked him about the cultivation of the dragon transformation script, but the brothers had never cultivated it. Goddess Green Melon was stunned for a moment, then she gave a cry of surprise, grabbed the jade bottle, and rushed out of the door. Perhaps Goldhorn and Silverhorn were the last pair of dragon pythons of fire and ice in all the worlds, and the heavy responsibility of breeding and strengthening the clan of dragon pythons fell on their shoulders. Dragon pythons of fire and ice? Only now did Wu Qi understand the origin of Goldhorn and Silverhorn. They were actually the legendary creatures? For dragon claws had grown out from under their stomachs, and 2 tumors the size of a human head had grown out from their backs. Wu Qi tried to use his divine sense to see what was inside the tumors, but a pliable force blocked Wu Qi's divine sense, preventing him from seeing through the mysteries inside. Goldhorn and Silverhorn's big heads were still in the shape of pythons, but they had dragon horns growing out from the top of their heads. Dragon pythons were strange creatures that resembled dragons and pythons, and their bloodlines were inextricably linked to dragons, but they were definitely not dragons. They could mate with any dragon or snake of the opposite sex, and every time they gave birth to 2, 4, 6, or 8 eggs, they would hatch into pairs of dragon pythons of fire and ice. Fortunately, Wu Qi had brought countless materials with him, so it was not difficult for him to expand the spirit breeding ring. Therefore, he agreed to it without hesitation. The Dark Yin energy vase was indeed magical. Along with the changes of the restrictive spells inside, the surface of the vase would change accordingly. If it were not for the fact that it did not have an item spirit, it could be ranked as a spirit treasure. Even a peerlessly ugly girl like Mother Wuyan could turn into a peerless beauty like Diaochan or Shishir by using Spirit Ripple True Water to clean her face. Not to mention that Fairy Green Melon was not ugly at all, and she was just wounded. With the Spirit Ripple True Water, she could forcibly adjust the position of the muscles and bones on her face, restoring her appearance to its original state. Therefore, Fairy Green Melon's criticism toward all the disciples of Taoist Min's clan was very sharp, and every word she said pointed to the key points, instead of some groundless nonsense. After scolding them for a while, Fairy Green Melon pulled Peppermint and Angelica's little hands, forcing Immortal Green Staff to quickly think of a way to vent his anger, and he had to do it cleanly, venting all the anger that he had accumulated over the years. Wu Qi gave his Grandmaster and Grandmaster Grandmother a look, who were deeply immersed in their schemes, then secretly gave Princess Zhonglu a wink, then sneaked out of the room. Wu Qi liked Fairy Green Melon's personality very much, and he could feel the care and love she had for her disciples. Therefore, he had to find a way to restore her appearance to its original state. If such a bold and passionate girl could never show her true face to others, wouldn't it be a very cruel thing? Starting from Taoist Min, who was a disrespectful old man, to Taoist Green Peng, who was greedy and lustful, Taoist Yu He, who was cowardly and afraid of death, Taoist Bo Lao, who was wretched and immoral, and Taoist Mo Luan, who forsook morality at the sight of profit, Fairy Green Melon had scolded every single disciple of Taoist Min's clan. However, her scolding was not without reason, but with reason and evidence. She seemed to know all the shameful things these people had done in a certain year, month, and day, and nothing could be hidden from her. Wu Qi smiled bitterly. He reached out his hand and injected a stream of pure blood energy into each of the 2 big fellows, helping them digest the burden in their stomachs. After that, he said, "There is 1 month left until the life and death match between Yuanhua sect and Huiling sect. If you can join the match at that time, there will be 110 people waiting for you to eat. If you don't want to join the match, then forget it." Grandmistress, I suddenly remembered that I found this spirit item in Shui Yuan planet, and I've specially presented it to you. Just like when they walked out of Great Yan's secret vault, the 2 brothers still had their stomachs bulging up, and wisps of flame and cold air could be seen coming out from the corners of their mouths as they stared straight at Wu Qi. Over the past 1 year, the 2 brothers had been eating and drinking in Great Yan's secret vault, and until today, they had not completely digested the demon cores and blood essences in their stomachs. With great difficulty, Goldhorn and Silverhorn raised their heads and said together, "We will cultivate diligently. 1 month later, we will definitely be able to join the match." Fairy Green Melon clapped her hands and laughed out loud. Pulling Immortal Green Staff's hand, she began to carefully calculate with him. Wu Qi gave her the jade bottle, which was brimming with natural energy and emanated a cold air, then explained the effect of the Ling Yi True Water. However, their horns were different from the normal dragon horns. They had many forks, and each fork was extremely sharp like a sharp blade. Wisps of flame coiled around the Goldhorn's horn, emanating a scorching heat, while the Silverhorn's horn was surrounded by a silver cold wind, which made even Wu Qi feel a little uncomfortable. However, the reproduction rate of dragon pythons of fire and ice was many times weaker than that of dragons. On top of that, since the ancient times, dragons had been granted the title of Dragon Kings by the Celestial Court, which made them the rulers of all the water veins in all the worlds. Therefore, no one dared to attack dragons recklessly. On the other hand, the proud and unyielding dragon pythons of fire and ice did not give a second thought to the Celestial Court's attempts to recruit them. The immortals in the universe were more than happy to capture and kill them to craft magical treasures, capture them as mounts, or simply make them into delicious food. As a result, the dragons grew stronger day by day, while the dragon pythons of fire and ice had nearly gone extinct. However, the two brothers had undergone earth-shaking changes. Their bodies had doubled in length, and they were now nearly 200 feet long. The scales on their bodies had become much thicker, and each scale was in the shape of a hexagon. On the corner of each scale, there was a tiny rune that was faintly discernible. It was obvious that the ancestral bloodline in their bodies had been stimulated and was gradually transforming their bodies. Burping, Goldhorn said in a disheveled manner, "It's been a long time since we felt so full. It's just that we don't want to digest the food in our stomachs so quickly. It's not that we can't digest them. It feels great to have a full stomach." "Are you still looking down on the dragon transformation script?" Wu Qi murmured vaguely, then shoved the brothers back into the spirit breeding ring and said, "Cultivate carefully. 10 days later, I'll help you transcend your thunder tribulation." "Are my demon pets allowed to participate in this match? I still have 10,000 longbow people here." Immortal Greenstaff quickly stepped forward and carefully told them the plan he came up with Taoist Li just now. All the houses here were densely covered with various restrictive spells, so they did not have to worry that someone might eavesdrop on them. As the people in the house were his own people, Immortal Greenstaff did not have to worry that someone might leak the secret. Therefore, he told them the plan he came up with just now, as well as all the detailed steps. From the Black Dragon Spirit Ring, Wu Qi took out a great amount of water element energy stones and shoved them into the vase. After that, he placed the vase on the branch in front of him and paid no attention to it. He touched the spirit breeding ring, and a beam of white light shot out from it. Goldhorn and Silverhorn fell down from the white light lazily, hanging themselves on the branch like dead snakes. After walking out from Patriarch Jiang Yun's abode, Wu Qi took a detour and came to a patch of woods at the back. He chose a tree that stood 1,000 feet tall, then flew up and sat down on one of the leafy branches. After that, he waved his hand, unleashing thousands of primordial runes that locked down the surrounding void. Unless it was a formidable expert who was proficient in the Tao of primordial runes like him, even if Patriarch Yuan Hua were to peep at them with his divine will, it would definitely alert Wu Qi. Chuckling, Wu Qi put away the vase and released the surrounding restrictive spells, then strode back into the abode. Chapter 393. After that, Patriarch Yuan Hua said, "After the life and death match, it will be a life and death match between Patriarch and Reverend Huilin. The life and death match is related to the ownership of both Yuan Hua sect and Huiling sect, and it will decide the rise and fall of both great immortal sections. Therefore, Patriarch has to fight with all his might, even at the cost of his own life. Therefore, if Patriarch is unfortunately killed, Qi, you will take charge of Yuan Hua Immortal Sect. The rest of you must cooperate with us wholeheartedly to strengthen Yuan Hua Sect. There is only 1 day left before the life and death match between our sect and Huiling sect. If our sect wins, we will be able to occupy the planet with the energy vein, and our overall strength will be further enhanced. For the next few days, all the disciples who will participate in the life and death match will stop their secluded cultivation and take a rest." It was only at this moment that Goddess Green Melon realized that she was still holding Wu Qi's ear. She let go abruptly, and in the next moment, she transformed from a raging mad woman into a dignified lady who was as quiet as still water. She nodded gently at Wu Qi, smiled, and said, "It is all thanks to the spirit water that Wu Qi has given me that my ancestral master's visage can be restored. In the future, if anyone dares to offend you in the sect, even if it is Uncle Master Min, Ancestral Master will definitely not let him off." Taoist Min openly tried to recruit Immortal Taiyu, but Immortal Taiyu straightforwardly rejected Taoist Min's invitation. Taoist Min's face turned dark. With a flick of his sleeve, he led his disciples into Patriarch Yuan Hua's Green Cliff Cave abode. Not even greeting Taoist Qi, Immortal Green Staff waved his hand and sprinkled a few layers of immortal light, adding tens of layers of restrictive spells on the inside and outside of the house. Wu Qi, Patriarch Jiang Yun, and Taoist Li came before Immortal Greenstaff. 4 of them sat around a small square table, putting their heads together and murmuring in low voices with gloomy faces. They looked like a group of robbers in a marketplace, planning where to do business. Naturally, the target of their plan was none other than the disciples from Taoist Min's sect. Taoist Li stroked his beard and laughed as he said, "Junior nephew Wu Qi, it's good that you've gotten used to it. We need to come up with a good plan to teach them a lesson." When the plan was settled, Wu Qi lightly knocked on the table and said in a deep voice, "I need to send the parents of Peppermint and Angelica to Greenwood Peak." Wu Qi cleared his throat and said in a low voice, "Zi Xian's birth mother died suddenly during childbirth." Goddess Green Melon was taken aback. She put her arms around Princess Zhonglu and said with a smile, "Zi Xian, where is your mother?" But today, Immortal Tai Yu suddenly expressed his goodwill towards Taoist Qi. He openly and forcefully punished his disciple who had made a mistake, expelled the master of Spirit Medicine Hall, Taoist White Sparrow, and then paid a visit to Taoist Qi. Qi had gained the support from Immortal Hua, Immortal Min, Hua, and Sect, and Imist Immortal Ming. Dao and Tai Hua Tiangong's clan, and clan was Hua, Taoist Abo, Sect, 1 in Tai Hua Sect, and of Mountain and clan, and Hua and Sect, Tai, of Sect and of Dao has. Along with Patriarch Yuan Hua's voice, a faint ringing of a golden bell reverberated through the clouds, shaking the surrounding trees and making them rustle. Wu Qi gave Taoist White Sparrow a deep look, and Taoist White Sparrow happened to turn his head to look at him. Therefore, Wu Qi saw the deep resentment in Taoist White Sparrow's eyes, as well as his determination to kill Wu Qi until he was dead. Just 2 hours later, Goddess Green Melon rushed into the hall while shouting and yelling, grabbing Wu Qi's ear. Together with Taoist Qi, 4 heaven immortals, led by Immortal Tai Yu, came rushing to Green Cliff Mountain. Taoist Qi rose to his feet, then dropped to his knees and bowed deeply. "Yes, Sect Master." Immortal Tai Yu smiled faintly, shaking his head and saying, "We'll talk again when we're free." Patriarch Yuan Hua did not show himself today. Although he was sitting in his cottage, his voice echoed throughout the entire small cave abode. The more spirit ripple true water a girl absorbed, the closer her appearance would be to the female template recognized by the great Tao of heaven and earth. Naturally, her appearance would be more beautiful, and her attraction to the opposite sex would be stronger. As Goddess Green Melon's face was wounded by a magical treasure, she had consumed a great amount of blood, essence, and energy. As a result, she could not restore her appearance in a short period of time, and could only wear a veil when meeting others. The spirit ripple true water could replenish the essence, blood, and vitality she had lost, and it could also adjust her aura. Immortal Green Staff laughed and said, "Green Melon has always been like this. She is too lazy to teach disciples, but she does not like male disciples either. She has been tormenting Greenwood Peak all day long. Now that we have Zi Xian, Peppermint, and Angelica, we can finally have some peaceful days." After that, Patriarch Yuan Hua went on to give out many orders, from what Yuan Hua sect had to do after the victory, to the retreat route if Yuan Hua sect was defeated. He explained all the details in a very clear and meticulous manner, without leaving any loopholes. Wu Qi could not help but admire Patriarch Yuan Hua inwardly. He was indeed the ancestral master who had single-handedly made Yuan Hua sect one of the 10 great sects in Puyo Heavenly Realm. His management skill was top-notch. Suddenly, a beam of cloud came rushing over from a corner. It was Taoist Qi, bringing a group of disciples. Under Taoist Qi, there was Immortal Green Staff, the eldest senior brother, and Yellowbeard, Lady Green Plum, and Goddess Green Melon, 3 heaven immortal disciples. In terms of the number of eldest senior disciples, they were more than enough to match Taoist Min. However, apart from Immortal Greenstaff, who had 2 heaven immortal disciples, Taoist Li and Patriarch Jiang Yun, Yellowbeard, and the other 2 heaven immortal disciples, they only had 2 heaven immortal disciples. Therefore, the overall strength of Taoist Qi's disciples was slightly weaker than Taoist Min. "Oh my, Wu Qi's grand disciple, what is this treasure you have?" Goddess Green Melon had taken off her veil, revealing an extraordinarily beautiful face that exuded a heroic spirit. Her face seemed to be covered by a thin layer of water vapor. It was hazy and faintly discernible, but it set off a few traces of feminine beauty in addition to her heroic spirit. She was like a whirlpool in a drowning pool. As long as one looked at her, one's gaze would be deeply sucked in. But it was a pity that some of his disciples were not very promising. Wu Qi tilted his head and looked at Goddess Green Melon with a wry smile. When they arrived at Green Cliff Mountain, Taoist Min, who was on the brink of death, happened to bring a group of disciples down from the cloud. Together with Emo Luan, Green Peng, Jade Crane, and Shrike, Taoist White Sparrow, and 4 other Heaven Immortal disciples, there were a total of 10 Heaven Immortals from Taoist Min's branch, which accounted for 30% of all the Heaven Immortals in Yuanhua sect. With her head held high, Goddess Green Melon pulled Princess Zhang Li's hand and walked out of the door in high spirits. Peppermint and Angelica timidly kowtowed to Wu Qi, then hastily caught up with Princess Zhang Lu, grabbing Princess Zhang Li's sleeves like a shadow. When Princess Zhang Lu saw what Wu Qi was doing, the anger in her heart calmed down immediately. She smiled sweetly and gently held Goddess Green Melon's hand, praising, "You are indeed a peerless beauty, and also a valiant warrior." When Yi Lu saw you, he felt like he was seeing his own mother. Suddenly, Princess Zhang Li's eyes turned red. No matter what kind of grudges they had, the fact that Taoist White Sparrow had placed his revenge on Peppermint and Angelica, 2 young girls with weak cultivation bases that were no different from ordinary mortals, had crossed some boundaries. According to Wu Qi's plan, regardless of whether they were from the same sect or the sect rules, he would definitely teach Taoist Min's branch a severe lesson. He would make them feel the pain, and he did not mind killing a few Heaven Immortals from Taoist Min's branch as a warning. Wu Qi was taken aback. He spread his arms and sighed innocently at Immortal Green Staff. Taoist Qi smiled faintly and shook his head, then brought the group of disciples and walked into the hall. After cupping his fist and thanking Goddess Green Melon, Wu Qi told her about the magical function of the Ling Yi True Water. The Ling Yi True Water was best at nurturing a thread of innate yin energy in female cultivators. The more innate yin energy a woman possessed, the more graceful and beautiful she would be. Therefore, unless she possessed some extremely special spirit root or innate talent, the better the aptitude of a woman, the more beautiful she would be. Upon hearing that the Ling Yi True Water was especially useful for women, Immortal Green Staff, Taoist Li, and Patriarch Jiang Yun lost all interest. However, Wu Qi's heart skipped a beat, as he sensed 2 hostile gazes staring at him. Gingerly, he gave them a sideways glance, and sure enough, it was Princess Zhang Lu, who was staring at him with eyes bursting with flames of fury. Wu Qi forced a smile, his lips twitching upward as he gave Princess Zhang Lu a meaningful glance. Goddess Green Melon cried out excitedly, "What a wonderful treasure! Not only can it restore my appearance, it can also replenish my innate yin energy. My greenwood spirit root was originally an upper-tier spirit root, but now, it has become a supreme-tier spirit root, and even my immortal soul has become stronger and tougher. It is almost equal to the cultivation base that I've acquired after 10,000 years of arduous cultivation. What exactly is this wonderful treasure?" Upon hearing Patriarch Yuanhua's words, Taoist Qi, Immortal Green Staff, and Patriarch Jiang Yun rose to their feet and answered respectfully, "Yes. An acquired true water like the Ling Yi True Water could nourish female cultivators by replenishing their innate yin energy, allowing their aura, blood essence, body shape, and appearance to be closer to the female template recognized by the great Tao of heaven and earth. And that template was the most perfect woman recognized by the great Tao of heaven and earth." Without wasting any time, Wu Qi and his company stepped onto clouds and flew towards Green Cliff Mountain. Goddess Green Melon walked at the front with her head held high, as if she was afraid that no one could see that her appearance had been restored. Taoist Li nodded and praised, "What martial nephew Wu Qi said is right. Let's remove all the worries first, and only then can we do what we need." Immortal Green Staff and Taoist Li looked dejected, while Goddess Green Melon pulled Princess Zhang Lu to her feet, sighed and said, "I see. My good grandson Wu Qi has made me happy today. But I can't give him any benefits. Xian, Peppermint, and Angelica, come with me. I have some good things here and I can give them to you girls. Taoist Li and these stinky Taoists must not be taken advantage of. Taoist Min's face darkened. He gave Taoist Chi a look, then clenched his jaws and dropped to his knees, saying in a deep voice, "We dare not disobey you." Wu Qi was instantly enraged. This fellow really doesn't know what's good for him. Goddess Green Melon gave Taoist Min a cold look, whose face was as gloomy as still water, then gave a cold snort. After that, she bowed to Taoist Qi and Immortal Taiyu. Taoist Min's face turned even uglier. "Junior brother Taiyu," he said in a deep voice, "if you have time, come visit my barren mountain." Chapter 394. Gradually, Wu Qi's face turned serious. 108 bolts of lightning had struck down from the heavenly tribulation of dragon pythons of fire and ice, and it had not stopped yet. Although each of the lightning bolts only slightly injured Goldhorn and Silverhorn, the brothers were already riddled with scars after 108 minor injuries, and they had consumed more than half of the pills to replenish their strength. Hovering in midair, Wu Qi looked quietly at the brothers. Puff, 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 for thunderous booms could be heard. The meatball behind the two brothers suddenly blasted open, and 4 nearly 300-meter-long wings spread. The enormous wings were covered with densely packed gold and silver scales. When the wings flapped, a large expanse of dazzling talisman light surged in the air. The heat wave brought by the wings instantly melted the small hill, and the cold air that followed froze the small hill that had just melted into an ice cube. Dragon pythons of fire and ice looked like a dragon, but not a dragon, like a python, but not a python. After devouring so many demon cores and blood essences from Great Yan's secret vault, the brothers had reached the threshold of advancement. After cultivating their nascent divinity and compressing the blood essence in their bodies, the brothers would immediately inherit the inherited memories in their bloodline and possess extraordinary divine abilities. Dragon pythons of fire and ice. Wu Qi was looking forward to the performance of this ancient species. Just as Wu Qi rose to his feet, wondering how he could help them, the brothers suddenly widened their eyes, threw their heads back, and let out a long roar. Spirit breeding rings were used by cultivators to store their demon pets, various goo worms, and other living creatures. The principle was similar to that of a storage ring, but at the same time, it was not quite the same. The storage ring had a vast space, but the time was frozen, so it could store all kinds of spirit herbs and pills without losing their spirituality over time. However, the spirit breeding ring was equivalent to a small world. The natural energy in it was constantly communicating with the outside world, and the flow of time was the same as the outside world. Therefore, living creatures could hide in the ring. Before the brothers could digest the power contained in the lightning bolt, the tribulation cloud in the sky trembled, and another lightning bolt, thicker than the previous one, came crashing down. The two brothers soared into the sky, opened their mouths wide, and swallowed the tribulation lightning into their stomachs. Then they twisted their bodies and fell to the ground in a sorry state. With a mysterious smile on his face, Wu Qi fished out a jar of sticky, pitch-black ointment from the black dragon spirit ring. With a shake of his hand, the ointment transformed into 2 fountains and shot into Goldhorn and Silverhorn's mouths. The 2 serpents, who had exhausted their strength, immediately regained their spirit. They gritted their teeth and tortured their bodies, trying to break free from the tough snakeskin cage. Swoosh, swoosh. Several dozens of swishing noises rang out as all the heaven immortals in Yuanhua sect arrived at the scene with teleportation. The transparent wings were flapping lightly. Looking at Goldhorn and Silverhorn, the hassock of Great Ocean Dividing Serpent, he nodded and said, "Dragon pythons of fire and ice? Their numbers are 100 times fewer than our Great Divide, aren't they? Back then, it was also a tyrannical race that once dominated the world, tsk. Again and again and again, Wu Qi simply sat cross-legged on the ground and shouted, "You can only rely on yourselves. Hang in there." Goldhorn and Silverhorn flew up at the same time. They opened their mouths and bit down on the thunderbolt, splitting it into two and swallowing it into their stomachs. Crack! A loud noise rang out as the tattered snakeskins on their bodies exploded at the same time. Countless scales scattered in all directions, and the brothers fell heavily to the ground, struggling and rolling in agony. Their newly regenerated snakeskins were shivering rapidly, expanding and growing rapidly. Gradually, the scales on their skin hardened, and numerous profound runes emerged on their surfaces. Looking at Hasek, Wu Qi smiled and said, "With me around, their race will thrive again." Goldhorn and Silverhorn curled up their bodies at the same time. Goldhorn opened his mouth and breathed out a stream of cold air, smashing heavily onto Silverhorn's body. Silverhorn also breathed out a clump of flame, smashing heavily onto Goldhorn's body. Then, both brothers breathed out the power of tribulation that they could not withstand, asking their brother to use his innate divine ability to neutralize it. Meanwhile, the cold air from Goldhorn and the flame from Silverhorn were the energy they needed to form their dragon python souls and temper their dragon python bodies respectively. While rubbing the spirit-breeding ring, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "It will be best if I can bring my demon pets with me, hee." Flapping their fleshy wings, the brothers flew up into the sky and entered the tribulation cloud, using their strong bodies to absorb the power of tribulation. One tribulation thunderbolt after another kept smashing onto their bodies. A strong light radiated from their bodies, and a frightening aura spread thousands of miles away. However, the materials used to make spirit-breeding rings were becoming rarer and rarer in the current world of cultivators. Therefore, an ordinary spirit-breeding ring was only about 10 feet in size. If word of Wu Qi's spirit-breeding ring, which could accommodate 10,000 longbow men, were spread out, it would be enough to scare a large number of people, and perhaps even those heaven immortals would not be able to restrain themselves from snatching it. On the contrary, those mighty figures at the level of Gold Immortal and above would not be greedy for it. After all, Gold Immortals were able to carry the small world they created with them, which was much stronger than the spirit-breeding ring. The cold wind and the hot airflow ravaged the ground tens of miles in circumference, turning the ground into a lake of lava one moment, then a tundra the next. In just a few breaths of time, the forest within tens of miles had turned into the finest dust. Hasek was struck dumb. He gave Wu Qi a deep look, then nodded and said, "Perhaps." Shaking his head, Hasek remembered the confident smile on Wu Qi's face, then turned and flew back into Wu Qi's spiritual ocean, continuing to sleep in the boundless ocean, quietly absorbing the innate water energy produced in Wu Qi's body. The roar sounded like that of a dragon, yet not at the same time. It was deep and resounding, with a hint of ferocity and brutality. If the roar of a dragon was said to be pearls and gems, then the roar of the brothers was a crystal ball that was fully covered with sharp thorns, glinting dazzlingly yet deadly. Goldhorn and Silverhorn's bodies trembled slightly. Suddenly, they opened their mouths and sprayed out a stream of flame and a stream of cold air towards Taoist Emolwan. It was the fire and ice thunder tribulation, unique to the clan of dragon pythons of fire and ice. Just like other innately powerful creatures, when the experts from various clans, such as dragons, phoenixes, and Chilants improved their cultivation base or underwent a metamorphosis, they would always be struck by a thunder tribulation unique to their own clan. The fire and ice thunder tribulation was exactly the same. The power of the thunder contained the opposite attributes of firmness and softness, scorching and bitter coldness. It was a thunder tribulation that was extremely difficult to guard against. Goldhorn and Silverhorn shook their big heads together, throwing their heads back and letting out a long roar. Their bodies nearly straightened up, like two huge trees facing the sky, supporting their bodies with only the tips of their tails. They opened their mouths, which measured nearly 10 feet in circumference, and aimed at the thunderclouds in the sky, assuming a posture as if they were going to devour everything. The newly grown snakeskins on the brothers' bodies shone with a faint glow. Streams of red and white light rippled out from them, gradually fusing into their bodies. Goldhorn and Silverhorn were lying lazily on the ground, their sharp claws feebly tearing their badly mutilated bodies. Their bodies were covered in bloody wounds, long wounds that ripped open their scales. Large pieces of gold and silver scales were hanging around the wounds in a messy manner. A few loud clangs rang out as Goldhorn knocked his forehead against the ground, bringing up a large number of fire sparks. The snakeskin on his forehead cracked, exposing the newly grown skin underneath that was milky white mixed with a hint of pale gold. Meanwhile, Silverhorn opened his mouth wide and bit a piece of broken skin on his body with his sharp fangs. As he shook his head over and over again, the crack on his skin grew bigger and bigger, exposing a large patch of new, silvery skin. Cracking noises kept ringing out from under their thick scales. Their bodies were growing, their bones were growing thicker and longer, and their muscles were becoming thicker and stronger. But their snakeskins had restricted their further development. They could only tear the snakeskins themselves, freeing their bodies from this natural cage. They had consumed a great deal of physical strength and energy. Their claws tore the snakeskins and produced shrill noises of friction. Their bodies wriggled slightly, and from time to time, flames and cold gleams sprayed out of their mouths. Stroking the spirit-breeding ring, Wu Qi was once again reminded of the question he had last time. Are demon pets allowed to be brought into the duel? Isn't it a little too much to bring two nascent divinity realm dragon pythons of fire and ice into the duel, with 10,000 long bowmen ready to help at any time? Amidst the long and sonorous roars, the brothers' bodies expanded to about 1,000 feet long. Together with the huge, oddly shaped wings on their backs, they looked mighty and ferocious, like two fearsome ancient extraordinary beasts. Their claws had grown out as well. The 4 claws under their abdomens were similar to dragon claws, but they had one more joint, which made them much thicker, more agile, and more lethal. Their heads still looked like great pythons, but the dragon horns on their heads were bigger and more forked, and the cold wind and heat streams coiling around them made it harder for anyone to approach them. However, if Goldhorn and Silverhorn wanted to cultivate their nascent divinity, they would need the help of the thunder tribulation of ice and fire. They had to absorb and digest the unique fire and ice energy contained in the thunder tribulation, fusing them into their souls. Only then could they form their nascent divinity. If Wu Qi were to help them resist the thunder tribulation at this moment, the brothers would never be able to make any progress in their entire lives. Looking at the brothers hovering midair absorbing the thunder tribulation, Taoist Mo Luan was both surprised and envious. Why are these two beasts so fierce? He cursed under his breath. 10 days after Yuanhua sect assembly, Wu Qi was seen hovering midair on top of a small hill surrounded by craggy rocks behind Green Cliff Mountain. Looking at the tribulation clouds in the sky, Wu Qi frowned as he flew tens of miles backward. Goldhorn, Silverhorn, he said in a deep voice. Goldhorn, Silverhorn, be careful. When you run out of stamina, consume some pills immediately to replenish your energy and blood. Wu Qi had prepared a great amount of pills for the brothers in advance. As long as Goldhorn and Silverhorn were not too careless, and the thunder tribulation did not kill them completely in one go, it would not be difficult for them to transcend the thunder tribulation. For a moment, red and white gleams were flashing on the brothers' bodies, while cold air and hot wind were spreading in all directions. The rocks on the small hill could not withstand the rapid change of heat and cold, and exploded and shattered one after another. Right at this moment, a very faint thunderclap echoed out from the sky, as a red and white thunderbolt came whistling down. The bestial aura emanating from Goldhorn and Silverhorn's bodies grew stronger and stronger. It was as if a baby had grown into a burly man who stood over 10 feet tall and was burly with muscles all over his body. Their aura had become completely different from before. Guided by their aura, a thin layer of red cloud came wheeling slowly down from the sky. Amidst the cloud, numerous red thunderbolts as fine as hair and white cold air were seen rolling and tangling with each other. Piece after piece of snakeskin was ripped off by the brothers, while the aura emanating from their bodies grew stronger and stronger. An ancient bestial aura was vaguely spreading out from their bodies, while the gleam in their eyes grew stronger and stronger. Suddenly, Wu Qi felt a chill on his forehead. The item spirit of Darkeen Hasek was startled by the aura, and sprung out from Wu Qi's body in surprise. But I don't think any other cultivator has a spirit-breeding ring with such a huge space, right? Chapter 395. No one expected that Goldhorn and Silverhorn would attack just because of Taoist Mo Luan's malicious words. However, dragon pythons of fire and ice were the most ferocious creatures under the heaven. In their eyes, apart from Wu Qi, everyone else was no different than their food. After the baptism of the thunder tribulation of ice and fire, the two brothers had recovered the inherited memories of the dragon pythons of ice and fire in their bloodlines. They had also inherited the dragon pythons of ice and fire's ferocity and unreasonable arrogance. Since Taoist Mo Luan dared to curse them, there was no reason for them not to attack. Every time they attacked, they would unleash a killing strike without showing any mercy. Like two comets, the 1,000 feet long red beam and the other white beam intertwined and shot across the sky, producing a shrill and unpleasant whistling noise. The noise went straight into Yuan Hua Sect's spiritual ocean, sounding like the howling of evil spirits from hell. It shook the souls of all the heaven immortals of Yuan Hua Sect in the surroundings. Even Patriarch Jiang Yun and Taoist Li, who were 36th tier heaven immortals, nearly had their immortal souls shaken out from their bodies. Taoist Mo Luan's face fell. "Damn beasts," he bellowed furiously. With a wave of his right hand, a sheet of dark light flew out, transforming into an exquisite shield that measured about 1 foot in circumference. A large sheet of dark light and green smoke emanated from the shield, wrapping around his body. It was Taoist Mo Luan's proudest magical treasure, an immortal item-grade defensive shield, the Smoke Luan Shield. It was crafted using the Earth Core Crimson Flame Dark Copper, and during the crafting process, Taoist Mo Luan was lucky enough to obtain the soul of an extraordinary bird that possessed the bloodline of Luan and Phoenix as its item spirit. As a result, the shield possessed an extraordinary sentience and an outstanding defensive strength. Furthermore, when he wielded the Smoke Luan Shield, it was as if he had grown a pair of wings. His flying speed and dexterity were doubled. Therefore, not only did the Smoke Luan Shield have an outstanding defensive strength, it was also a great help to Taoist Mo Luan in fights of magical powers. Wrapped in the dark light and green smoke, Taoist Mo Luan tilted his body slightly to one side and instantly moved several hundred feet away like a fish. According to the trajectory of the red and white lights, his casual evasion was enough to make Goldhorn and Silverhorn's attacks miss. It showed his uniqueness in the immortal technique and his outstanding vision. Only by evading in such a way could he show his status. However, Goldhorn and Silverhorn were ancient mutated dragon pythons of fire and ice. How could their attacks be dodged so easily? Swish! The red and white beams vanished abruptly, as they teleported right before Taoist Mo Luan and smashed forcefully onto the Smoke Luan Shield. A long cry that sounded like that of a dragon, yet not a dragon, rang out, followed by a sharp and melodious cry of a bird. The Smoke Luan Shield shone with a blinding light, and a large sheet of green light burst out. Taoist Mo Luan gave a muffled snort as he was knocked flying away by the red and white light. Like a cannonball, he shot up over 100 miles into the sky. A series of clashing noises echoed out as the red and white light shattered inch by inch when they collided with the Smoke Luan Shield. Every inch of the red and white light would burst into a large sheet of red flame and countless cold gleams. When the flame and cold gleams collided, it was as if a vast ocean had plunged into a volcano in the Earth's core. Fire and water could not tolerate each other, resulting in a violent explosion. The power of each explosion was comparable to a heavenly thunderbolt. Although Taoist Mo Luan had a profound cultivation base, he was still shaken by the explosions, and his blood and energy were roiling, while his immortal soul was nearly ripped out of his body by the constant dragon roars. This. By now, Goldhorn and Silverhorn had absorbed all the thunder tribulation in the tribulation cloud into their bodies. Their dragon python nascent divinities had reached the phenomenal stage, and they had also obtained the mystic cultivation technique of dragon pythons of fire and ice in their bloodline, the dragon python dark scripture. It was a divine ability that allowed them to cultivate both their fleshly body and nascent divinity at the same time, and eventually, their fleshly body would turn into a saint. In the ancient times, the clan of dragon pythons of fire and ice relied on the dragon python dark scripture to dominate the world, even suppressing the dragons and becoming the leader of the scaled clan. At that time, the supreme experts of the dragon pythons of fire and ice could even eat divine dragons as food, ancient golden immortals as desserts, and ancient celestials as snacks. This showed how powerful the dragon python mystic scripture was. The brothers spread their fleshy wings and flapped them violently, bringing up a sheet of red light and a gust of cold wind. They let out long and sonorous roars as their scales opened and closed, while the enormous dragon python energies in their bodies were rolling rapidly along the meridians recorded in the dragon python dark scripture. Like two black holes, the brothers were rapidly absorbing the surrounding natural energies and converting them into new dragon python energies. Dragon pythons were greedy and brutal by nature, and the same was true for their cultivation technique. If one were to say that immortal cultivators still had to consider the harmony between heaven and earth, the core of dragon python's cultivation technique was only one thing: plunder, plunder, plunder until the pond was dry. Devour, devour, devour without any taboo. As the brothers unleashed their power, the energy veins under the back of Green Cliff Mountain rocked violently, while the natural energies in the underground veins turned into raging tides that could be seen with naked eyes and rushed into the brothers' bodies. Their cultivation base grew rapidly, and the newly born dragon python energies quickly filled their new bodies, which had expanded to about 1,000 feet long. Their strength grew stronger and stronger, and as their overall strength grew, their ability to absorb natural energies became stronger as well. Amidst wild roars, Goldhorn and Silverhorn flapped their wings ferociously, transforming into two beams of light that chased after Taoist Mo Luan. Their fangs were clenched so tightly that they produced cracking noises, while saliva was dripping down from the corners of their mouths. It looked like they were very hungry for Taoist Mo Luan. When Goldhorn's saliva dripped on the ground, each drop of it melted the ground within a radius of 1,000 feet into lava, while Silverhorn's saliva turned a small hill into an iceberg. The surrounding heaven immortals looked at each other with great astonishment. When had they ever seen such ferocious and strange pythons? Meanwhile, Taoist Qi and Taoist Min had turned to look at Wu Qi. They knew that Goldhorn and Silverhorn were Wu Qi's demon pets, and Wu Qi had brought them to the back of the mountain, preparing to transcend their thunder tribulation. Taoist Qi could not help but grin and say, "It seems there is no rule against bringing demon pets during the match." Although Taoist Min did not get along well with Taoist Qi, this was a matter that concerned the foundation and future of Yuanhua sect. Upon hearing Taoist Qi's words, Taoist Min nodded and said, "That's right, that's right. These two dragon pythons are as strong as a few nascent divinity cultivators. If nothing goes wrong, we will definitely win this match." Both men exchanged a glance, and with a tacit understanding, they did not summon Taoist Mo Luan, Goldhorn, and Silverhorn back. Taoist Qi wished that Goldhorn and Silverhorn would give Taoist Mo Luan a good beating, while Taoist Min was pondering whether Taoist Mo Luan could kill these two dragon pythons. Although this was an important matter related to the match, Yuanhua sect still had a great chance of winning with or without these two dragon pythons. Therefore, it was better to let Mo Luan kill these two beasts. Taoist Mo Luan's body trembled violently as the powerful red and white light finally dissipated. He was so angry that he let out a strange laugh and cursed, "What a pair of beasts! Beasts! I'll definitely teach you a good lesson today." The dazzling smoke Luan shield sprayed out a burst of dark gleam and green smoke as Taoist Mo Luan gracefully sped through the air, leaving tens of afterimages behind as he quickly approached Goldhorn and Silverhorn, who were leaping towards him. Taoist Mo Luan had the intention to show off his movement technique. With the help of the smoke Luan shield, his movement technique was agile and quick, without any hesitation. He was like a feather gliding amidst a strong wind, and when he turned and turned, even the divine will of ordinary heaven immortals could not locate his exact location. A movement technique like this gave him a great advantage in a fight of magical powers. No one could locate Taoist Mo Luan, and none of their magical spells, flying swords, or magical treasures could hit him. On the other hand, he could attack his enemies with ease, which naturally gave him a great advantage. But today, this advantage was completely ineffective in front of Goldhorn and Silverhorn. Dragon pythons of fire and ice had all sorts of magical features in their strong fleshly bodies, one of which was their incredible vision. As long as Goldhorn and Silverhorn focused their attention on their eyes, they could see even the transmission of photons clearly. They could even see through the teleportation of an immortal's body in different dimensions when he was teleporting. As for the strongest ancient dragon pythons of fire and ice, their eyes could even go back in time and see what had happened in the past. Aided by their incredible eyesight, both brothers could see every single detail of Taoist Mo Luan's body. Nevertheless, Goldhorn and Silverhorn were very cunning. They pretended to be flustered by Taoist Mo Luan's unpredictable afterimages, hooking their tails together and forming a ring-shaped protective circle with their wings. Their big claws were tucked under their abdomens, and their big heads were glancing around in panic, while wisps of flame and streams of cold air kept bursting out of their mouths. Taoist Mo Luan had forgotten that just like the other immortals of Yuan Hua sect, he was severely wounded at the moment, and his overall strength was only less than 30% of his peak state. His current magical power and divine abilities were only equal to an ordinary 36th tier heaven immortal. On top of that, he could not fight with all his might, as once he used too much immortal energy, his already stabilized injuries would flare up immediately. Even under such circumstances, Taoist Mo Luan still wasted his immortal energy wantonly, showing off his magical and unpredictable movement technique as he gracefully approached Goldhorn and Silverhorn. Suddenly, Taoist Min's voice rang out in Taoist Mo Luan's mind, "My disciple, kill these two beasts. You have a good excuse to kill them since they attacked you first." Upon hearing Taoist Min's voice, Taoist Mo Luan's eyes lit up. He opened his mouth and shot out a white flying sword shaped like a sparrow's beak. It transformed into a curved beam of light and shot gracefully towards the vital spots between Goldhorn and Silverhorn's brows. Last time, Taoist Mo Luan's flying sword was destroyed by Patriarch Jiang Yun, and Wu Qi had snatched its remains and fed it to the earth element dragon scale shield. The flying sword Taoist Mo Luan was using now was an immortal item grade flying sword, which Taoist Min had spent a lot of effort to buy for him. However, although it was an immortal item grade flying sword, it was much weaker than his original flying sword in terms of both power and intelligence. Right when the sword beam shot out, Goldhorn and Silverhorn's bodies suddenly turned blurry. Without any preparation, the brothers teleported right next to Taoist Mo Luan's true form. The sword beam brushed past their bodies, not harming them at all. Their heads and tails joined each other, forming a circle that trapped Taoist Mo Luan within. Then, they thrust their huge claws out, bringing together a large sheet of raging flame and a cold gleam as they slapped viciously onto Taoist Mo Luan's body. Like an iron hammer smashing a rubber ball, the brothers' huge claws slapped viciously onto the dazzling green smoke that protected Taoist Mo Luan's body, sending him flying all over the sky. He waved his arms and legs and could no longer keep his balance. After a few tens of violent attacks, the smoke Luan shield actually exploded with a loud crack. Goldhorn thrust his tail, which was covered with razor-sharp scales and stood erect like blades, and smashed forcefully onto Taoist Mo Luan's chest. Chapter 396. The sudden explosion of the smoke Luan shield stunned all the heaven immortals present. Even Taoist Mo Luan's mind went blank, as he could not figure out what was going on. No matter what, Taoist Mo Luan had asked a 29th tier item crafting master from Pueyuo Heavenly Realm, and spent several tens of thousands of years to gather the geocentric crimson flame dark copper. It was an immortal item that Taoist Mo Luan was proud of. Not even ordinary heaven immortals could break the defense of the smoke Luan shield, yet it was completely destroyed by these two great serpents? Taoist Qi and Taoist Min had their mouths agape at the same time. Taoist Qi had a strange smile on his face, while Taoist Min's face turned blue. Meanwhile, all the heaven immortals from Yuan Hua sect turned to look at Wu Qi at the same time, This little fellow was the master of these two great serpents. Goldhorn's tail slapped heavily on Taoist Emolwan's chest. Taoist Emolwan had never tempered his immortal body, and only focused on the cultivation of his immortal soul and magical power. However, dragon pythons of fire and ice were famous for their powerful fleshly bodies since the ancient times. With just a swing of their tails, they left a half-foot-deep wound on Taoist Emolwan's chest, nearly cutting him open. A large amount of golden immortal blood sprayed out from the wound, while Taoist Emolwan was knocked flying backward and slammed headfirst into Silverhorn. Laughing strangely, Silverhorn grabbed Taoist Emolwan with one claw and shoved him into his mouth. While attacking, he said hastily, "Don't worry, elder brother. I'll eat the upper body and leave the lower body for you. Tiske, there is still a good ingredient for the three whips soup." Goldhorn cursed anxiously, curling up his body and leaping toward Silverhorn. Upper body, upper body. 70% of the essence of an immortal was gathered in the upper body. The internal organs were the source of the 5 energies in an immortal's body. The head was the place where the immortal soul and intelligence gathered, and the most valuable thing of an immortal was the upper body. If Silverhorn took the upper body for himself, didn't that mean all the benefits of Emolwan would belong to him? As for the good ingredient, Goldhorn was not interested in it at all. The two great serpents were rolling and struggling in midair for the sake of Taoist Emolwan, who was badly wounded. Taoist Emolwan was tightly gripped by Silverhorn's claws, and the tremendous force nearly crushed his severely wounded immortal body. The destruction of the Smoke Phoenix shield had affected his immortal soul and caused it to suffer a heavy injury. Presently, his mind was in a state of turmoil, and he didn't even have the strength to fight back. Nevertheless, Taoist Emolwan had no time to care about the discomfort, as he kept howling at the top of his voice, "How could this be? The Smoke Phoenix shield is a 30th grade immortal artifact. How can it be shattered by two beasts who have just condensed their nascent divinities? How could this be? The Smoke One shield is a 30th grade immortal artifact, the masterpiece of Master Swan Dan. How could you break it?" Wu Qi stood on the ground with his hands behind his back and sneered. Using the mystic eyes of universe, Wu Qi had seen the scene of the Smoke One shield shattering. That's right, it was a grade 30 immortal artifact, a pretty good item. Unfortunately, its main material was the geocentric scarlet flame mysterious copper. This kind of pure yang material had amazing defensive power. It had excellent defensive power against all kinds of true fire and lightning spells. However, everyone has their own advantages and disadvantages, and every living thing under the heaven had something that could restrain them. The geocentric scarlet flame mysterious copper was afraid of the attack from acquired Yin energy. Goldhorn's scorching flames and hot air did not pose any threat to the Smoke Phoenix shield, but the cold gleam shot out by Silverhorn contained a thread of innate Yin energy that was unique to the clan of dragon pythons of fire and ice, which was produced by using their own bodies as the cauldron. The power of the cold gleam was incredible, and the Smoke Phoenix shield was perfectly restrained by it. How could it not shatter? Seeing that Taoist Emolwan was about to be tortured to death by the two brothers, Wu Qi cleared his throat and cried out, "All right, Goldhorn, Silverhorn, put down Uncle Master Emolwan. If you eat something wrong, you will have diarrhea." Goldhorn and Silverhorn, who were chasing each other in midair, turned stiff immediately, lowering their heads like deflated balloons. Silverhorn rolled his eyes and loosened his claws, causing Taoist Emolwan to fall down like a rock. However, Taoist Emolwan was, after all, an experienced heaven immortal. Although he was severely wounded just now, he still managed to catch his breath and stabilize his body after falling for several hundred feet. He gave Goldhorn and Silverhorn a glance, who looked dejected and sad because their delicacies were gone, and said with a deep voice, "For today's humiliation I—" Wu Qi interrupted Taoist Emolwan. With both hands clasped behind his back, he sighed and said, "Why are you bickering with two beasts, Uncle Master? They know nothing, and they are just two greedy beasts. They are just transcending their thunder tribulation, yet they were insulted by someone. That is why their wild nature flared up and attacked you, Uncle Master. As a heaven immortal, Bickering with two beasts is a disgrace to your status. Although Wu Qi's words were extremely unpleasant to the ears, they had captured the thoughts of these heaven immortals. It was Taoist Mo Luan who insulted Goldhorn and Silverhorn first, and then the two beasts attacked him. They were beasts, so how could one reason with them? Taoist Mo Luan brought this upon himself, and no one could help him. As for the fact that Taoist Mo Luan's prized immortal item was destroyed, and he himself was severely wounded by Goldhorn and Silverhorn, how could he still have the nerve to continue talking about this matter when he could not even deal with the two beasts he mentioned? Taoist Mo Luan's face turned green and red with anger, and he nearly coughed out blood. Fortunately, he knew that he was now suffering from more injuries. In the battle with Huiling sect, he was already severely wounded, and 70% of his cultivation base was temporarily crippled. Now, he was wounded by Goldhorn and Silverhorn. If he coughed out another mouthful of blood, it would undoubtedly be one disaster after another, and his immortal soul and energy would be damaged. For Taoist Mo Luan, every drop of blood was extremely precious, and the loss of a drop of blood would make his injuries worse. He cupped his fist and bowed to Taoist Min without saying a word. With a gloomy face, he picked up the broken pieces of the Smoke Luan shield and put away its item spirit and soul, then staggered and stepped onto a cloud, preparing to leave. But right at this moment, a beam of golden light sprinkled down from the sky and shone on Taoist Mo Luan's body. An enormous immortal energy essence was injected into Taoist Mo Luan's body from afar, healing his injuries at an incredible speed. Taoist Qi, Taoist Min, and Immortal Tai Yu were startled. These heaven immortals cupped their fists and said, "Ancestral Master." Patriarch Yuan Hua's voice was heard coming from afar. "Qi, Minner, Mo Luan, Wu Qi, come here, all of you," he said in a low voice. Those who were called by Patriarch Yuan Hua dared not to be negligent. Without hesitation, they quickly stepped onto clouds and flew towards Green Cliff Mountain. The beam of golden light followed Taoist Mo Luan all the way to Green Cliff Mountain, and only then it slowly faded away. After being replenished by the enormous immortal energy essence in the golden light, Taoist Mo Luan's injuries were 70 to 80% healed, and even his immortal body, which was severely wounded by Huiling sect's immortals, had almost fully recovered. As Patriarch Yuan Hua's cultivation base was much stronger than Taoist Mo Luan, the fact that he was consuming his own energy essence to heal Taoist Mo Luan was like an elephant transfusing blood to an ant. Every little bit of blood the elephant lost was more than enough for the ant to exchange all its blood. In Patriarch Yuan Hua's eyes, Taoist Mo Luan's injuries were nothing serious. But immortal energy essence was extremely important, and if it was not necessary, which heaven immortal would waste his own energy essence to heal someone else? That would be too great a loss. The group of 4 men and 2 serpents came before Patriarch Yuan Hua's wooden hut, but they still could not find him. The door was tightly shut, and they could only hear his voice. "Are these 2 great serpents the legendary ancient extraordinary beasts, dragon pythons of fire and ice? Excellent. With just one snow-armored heaven-devouring python, Eminent Cloud Sect is able to reign supreme in Pueyuo Heavenly Realm. In the future, Yuan Hua Sect will not be weaker than them." Goldhorn and Silverhorn twitched their mouths and turned their heads away indifferently. What was a snow-armored heaven-devouring python? According to the bloodline memories of the brothers, this little fellow was nothing but a disdainful existence. Dragon pythons of fire and ice were the supreme existences of the ancient scaled clan, while snow-armored heaven-devouring python was at most a local tyrant. The gap between them was simply too huge. Patriarch Yuan Hua gave Goldhorn and Silverhorn a few praises, then his tone suddenly turned extremely heavy. "It has been 100,000 years. You should have had enough, right?" Taoist Qi and Taoist Min's faces flickered with fear. They exchanged a glance, then dropped to their knees at the same time. Taoist Mo Luan dared not to say a word, and hastily dropped to his knees as well. Patriarch Yuan Hua sighed and said, "Many years ago, the few of us, master and disciples, had spent a lot of effort to build a strong foundation in Pueyuo Heavenly Realm. But because of Qing Fu, both of you turned against each other, causing a foul atmosphere in the sect. For the sake of the relationship between us, master and disciple, I allowed you to do whatever you wanted. Now, have you had enough? Taoist Qi and Taoist Min remained kneeling on the ground, daring not to say a word. They just kept kowtowing. Cold sweat kept breaking out of Taoist Mo Luan's forehead, and his body was trembling slightly. Patriarch Yuan Hua said in a deep voice, "Today, I'll make the final decision. That's enough. A formidable enemy is approaching us, and a great calamity is right before our eyes. Yet, we still want to make a scene. Are you going to let Yuan Hua sect's foundation vanish before you stop?" Taoist Qi and Taoist Min asked in surprise, "What do you mean by that, master?" Patriarch Yuan Hua said in a deep voice, "This is a very serious matter. Apart from me, only you, Cheer and Minner, can know about it. Cheer, assemble all the disciples who will participate in the match, and make the final preparations. During the match, you will lead the team and keep watch. I'll only appear when I'm fighting with that old fogey Huiling alone. As for Minner, bring your capable disciples and bring all the Thunderbolt seeds we have in our storage. You can use all the powerful immortal talismans, formation flags, and formation discs." Grinning coldly, Patriarch Yuan Hua said with a hint of killing intent, "In 10 days' time, a strange beast will transcend its thunder tribulation in the windy plain of Song 2 planet. Minner, bring all the disciples and sneak in. Find an opportunity to severely injure that strange beast during the thunder tribulation." Taoist Qi and Taoist Min were taken aback at the same time. Wu Qi's eyes flickered as he asked in a deep voice, "Ancestral Master, is that strange beast the snow-armored heaven-devouring python from Eminent Cloud Sect? Could it be that he is about to advance his cultivation base by another tier? Is that enough for him to transform into a human form?" Taoist Qi, Taoist Min, and Taoist Mo Luan were taken aback, but they quickly nodded their heads as if they were enlightened. After a full 15 minutes, Patriarch Yuan Hua continued speaking. However, his tone was filled with a strong surprise and joy. "Wu Qi, my dear disciple, you are a smart and quick-witted one. Ha! It is the great python of Eminent Cloud Sect, the snow-armored heaven-devouring python, who is about to transcend his thunder tribulation." Wu Qi laughed, nodded his head thoughtfully, and said, "No wonder Yun Tianao was so easy to talk to when Yun Wuqi was eaten by catfish." Patriarch Yuan Hua laughed and said, "That's right. No wonder Yun Tianao was so easy to talk to that day." Whispers replaced the laughter. Wu Qi and his company began to discuss in low voices with Patriarch Yuan Hua across the wooden hut. Chapter 397. With an awkward smile on his face, Wu Qi quickly turned his head and grabbed Princess Zhang Li's little hand, telling her that he was already an ordinary mortal in the mortal world, and that it was impossible for him to have anything to do with the Buddhist League. Guru Gu he was taken aback, then a faint smile emerged on his face and his lips moved slightly. Then his voice rang out in Wu Qi's mind once again, "Don't be afraid, don't panic, benefactor. You are fated with the Buddhist League, and sooner or later, you will convert to the Buddhist League and comprehend the supreme principles together. Everyone around you, as long as you know them, can join the Buddhist League and become a bodhisattva, a vajra, or a protector of the heavenly kings. All of them are supreme Buddhas. There are 3,000 great Taoists in the Buddhist League, and all 3,000 great Taoists can lead to supreme Buddhas. The pure land of ultimate bliss of the Buddhist League is a supreme land. The magical techniques of the Buddhist League are boundless, so." All of a sudden, a bright and clear ray of light sprinkled down from the sky, as over 100 cultivators were descending at a high speed amidst a large cloud of light. Immortal Chuan raised his eyelids and gave them a glance, then clapped his hands and said with a smile, "Wonderful! The fellow immortals from Huiling sect are here. Hee, only the people from Yuan Hua sect are left." Gritting his teeth, he calculated that Huiling sect's overall strength would never be able to fight against the celestial court of Hua Luo heavenly realm represented by Reverend Miao Miao, and he was far from being a match for Reverend Miao Miao, a 26th tier heaven immortal. Although Reverend Huilin had a belly full of anger, he could only smile and nod at the surrounding immortals. As immortals had endless years, it was only natural that they would be extremely bored. Standing next to Immortal Chuan was Reverend Miao Miao, the immortal monarch of Celestial Court of Hua Luo Heavenly Realm, a lower upper-grade heavenly realm bordering Pueyuo Heavenly Realm. He pulled out a large dice bowl from under his sleeve and shouted, "Fellow immortals, come! Today is the grand occasion, how can we not make a bet? Place your bets, place your bets. Who will be the winner between the disciples of Yuan Hua sect and Huiling sect? Who will be the ancestral masters of both sects? Place your bets. The lowest bet is 1 immortal stone." Ha! Ha! Taoist Qi glared at Reverend Huilin without showing any sign of weakness. He said coldly, "My master is adjusting his breath in a secluded place and recuperating his spirit. He'll be ready to draw his sword and kill him later." Reverend Huilin froze for a moment and frowned. After the duel between the disciples of the two sects, the finale was the duel between him and Patriarch Yuan Hua. Before the duel between two immortals with similar cultivation bases, one impatiently traveled a long way from Huangqiao planet to Pueyuo Heavenly Realm with his disciples, while the other meditated somewhere outside Pueyuo Heavenly Realm, and the other meditated and regulated his breath. Therefore, the difference in strength between the two was obvious. Unknowingly, Patriarch Yuan Hua had gained the upper hand. Reverend Huilin's expression immediately turned extremely unsightly. "I'm having a life-and-death duel with my disciple here, yet you, Reverend Miao Miao, are betting on this life-threatening shady business?" Reverend Huilin was severely wounded, and did not look much better than 1 year ago. Clad in a bright red Taoist robe and a Taoist crown on his head, he came before the group of immortals on a cloud, together with over 100 disciples. Reverend Huilin glanced around, then cupped his fist and said in a deep voice, "Fellow immortals, you have come from afar. After Huiling's sect wins the victory today, we will hold a feast to celebrate with all of you." Reverend Gu, he had a green wooden medallion tied around his waist, engraved with 4 glinting relics. Surprisingly, he was a golden arhat with a cultivation base equivalent to a 24th tier heaven immortal, 1 level higher than Immortal Chuan, a 25th tier heaven immortal. A soundless Buddhist chant rang out directly in Wu Qi's mind, "Merciful Buddha! Benefactor, you are destined to meet the Buddha." Reverend Miao Miao was beaming with joy, revealing 2 rows of white teeth. He and Immortal Chuan's brows twitched, and immediately came to an agreement. Reverend Miao Miao would be the banker, while Immortal Chuan, as the host, would get 50% of the profit. In the sky above the glazed heaven immortal abode, where Immortal Chuan was cultivating in seclusion, a fragrant wind lingered in the air, and clouds filled the sky. Many heaven immortals stood on the clouds in groups, calling out to their friends and greeting their acquaintances loudly. No one knew how long immortals had been cultivating, and usually, a secluded cultivation would last for several thousand years. Many immortals whom they were familiar with had not seen each other for several tens of thousands of years. Now that they had finally met their old friends, they were naturally in a happy mood, greeting each other. Reverend Huilin's heart sank, his immortal energy stagnated, and his mind was thrown into disorder. But soon he thought of his trump card. After a brief moment of pondering, he sneered and returned to normal. Grinning coldly, he nodded and said, "Yuan Hua always likes to take advantage of others. Now that he is circulating his cultivation technique and regulating his breath, do you think he can fully recover his injuries?" With various thoughts and goals in mind, over 1,300 heaven immortals from Pueyuo Heavenly Realm and a few nearby heavenly realms came to the scene. Among them were even the immortal monarchs from a few nearby heavenly realms, who had brought their subordinates to watch the show excitedly. When immortals were gambling, the stakes were extremely rare immortal stones. Many of these heaven immortals were wealthy immortals, and all of them had placed at least 10 lower-grade immortal stones on the bet. Especially a few heaven immortals from Hualuo Heavenly Realm, who were trying to curry favor with Reverend Miao Miao, had placed a huge bet of 30 lower-grade immortal stones. On the other hand, the surrounding immortals were shouting excitedly. Hiding among the disciples of Yuan Hua sect, Wu Qi was looking curiously at Pilgrim Gu He, who stood right next to Immortal Chuan. The other few immortal monarchs from the celestial court were either clad in Taoist outfits or the official robes of immortal officials. They were shrouded in a faint immortal glow, giving them an extraordinary bearing. On the other hand, Pilgrim Gu He had a bald head and a ring scar on his face. He was clad in a green monk robe and a pair of straw sandals, with a string of Buddhist beads the size of chicken eggs wrapped around his left wrist. He was a Buddhist cultivator with an accomplished cultivation base. Wu Qi had never thought that he would have an affinity with Pilgrim Gu He just because he gave him a glance. Wu Qi would never believe that Pilgrim Gu He was a monk in his previous life. As if he had noticed Wu Qi's gaze, Pilgrim Gu He suddenly turned to look at Wu Qi, clasped his palms together, and uttered a Buddhist mantra. Reverend Miao Miao and the other immortals nodded and smiled, agreeing to Immortal Chuan's suggestion. For those bored yet immortal immortals, if news of such a fun match were to spread out, it would be worth at least several dozens of periods of time in the long years to come. A grand event like this would bring great benefits to their reputation. Naturally, they were more than happy to be the witness. Among the over 1,000 heaven immortals, at least 90% of them were bored. Upon hearing Reverend Miao Miao's words, they immediately produced one jade slip after another with a smile on their faces, on which were recorded their bets and the amount of their bets. With Reverend Miao Miao, an immortal official of the celestial court, acting as the banker, these immortals were not afraid that they would not be able to collect their bets. Right at this moment, a sudden outburst of cries interrupted Pilgrim Gu He's chatter. Reverend Huilan's eyes went wide as he stared at Taoist Qi and cried out furiously, "Taoist Qi, where is Yuan Hua?" The match between their disciples would decide the ownership of a planet with abundant energy stones that had never been mined before. It could almost determine the future development of a sect for the next 10,000 years. Over 1,300 heaven immortals had brought tens of thousands of disciples with them, as well as countless strange mounts. Some of these mounts had glowing furs, some had shiny horns, and some were treading upon strange phenomena such as water, fire, wind, and clouds. All sorts of strange phenomena filled the sky with dazzling lights. It was truly a scene of immortals, different from the world of mortals. From time to time, some immortals would fly down from the sky on clouds. Every time they did so, it would draw the exclamations and whispers of laughter from the crowd of immortals. Hearty laughter resounded through the heaven and earth. Streams of light, clouds, flood dragons, luan phoenixes, white deers, immortal cranes, heaven immortals, together with their disciples, were seen traversing across the void with their divine abilities, heading straight towards Pulyuo heavenly realm. Strange lights flickered in the sky, and a fragrant breeze filled the air. Some immortals who loved extravagance even spent their immortal energies to hoist palaces, pavilions, or even small mountains up into the sky, heading straight towards Pulyuo heavenly realm. Today was the day of the match between Yuan Hua sect and Huiling sect. Upon hearing the news, all the heaven immortals from Pulyuo heavenly realm and several dozens of nearby heavenly realms had come to Pulyuo heavenly realm with great interest. An ancient abode of the human race? What was that? Wu Qi quickly went through Lady Dark Goldwater's memories, but found nothing. This was the first time Wu Qi saw a cultivator from the Buddhist League in this world. Reverend Gu He was a skinny man, with a dignified and solemn face. His skin was shimmering with a faint golden gleam. Obviously, he had cultivated the Dharma body of Vajra unique to Buddhist League to a very powerful realm. Yet, the Golden Arhat of Buddhist League was one of the few existences who could fight against a powerful race like the Heavenly Dragon Clan with just their fleshly bodies. Shaking his head and smiling disapprovingly, Reverend Huilan cupped his fist at Immortal Chuan and said, "Immortal Monarch, please be the witness for the match between our two sects." Immortal Chuan laughed out loud, then turned to Reverend Miao Miao from Hua Luo Heavenly Realm, Immortal Tsang Miao from Yuan Luo Heavenly Realm, Immortal Carefree from Mi Luo Heavenly Realm, and Reverend Gu He from Ni Luo Heavenly Realm, and said, "Fellow immortal monarchs, why don't we join hands to be the witness for this match? In the future, when this matter is mentioned, it will be a great story in 5 Luo Heavenly Realm." The match between the ancestral masters of two sects would decide the ownership of their sects, and it would directly determine the rise and fall of a sect. Even if they could obtain the energy stone planet, they would lose the foundation of their sects, and the decline of the sect was just around the corner. While Wu Qi was dizzy from the noise, he heard Immortal Chuan say complacently, "That's right. The venue of the life and death match between the disciples of Yuan Hua sect and Huiling sect will be held at the place I've recently discovered, the ancient mansion of the human race." Wu Qi was so scared that his hair stood on end. Suddenly, he recalled the various novels he read back on Earth. Didn't all the monks in those novels do the same thing? It was easy to say that the benefactor was fated with the Buddha, and then the treasures would become their treasures, and the disciples with good aptitudes would also become their disciples. This was the most favorite trick of these bald monks. As all the immortals placed their bets, the sky was filled with streams of light. Suddenly, a strong light burst out from the grand universal teleportation formation in Puyo Heavenly Realm. Led by Taoist Qi, Immortal Green Staff, and Goddess Green Melon, all 110 cultivators from Yuan Hua sect who participated in the match slowly walked out from the formation. Compared to those immortals who came to Puyo Heavenly Realm by exercising their divine abilities and dharma spells, Yuan Hua sect was keeping a very low profile. It had been a very long time since such a direct confrontation between two great immortal sects took place in the last several dozens of periods. Therefore, how could people not be curious, their blood boiling, and not rush to Puyo Heavenly Realm to watch the show? Especially the various immortal sects in Puyo Heavenly Realm, they were paying close attention to the outcome of the match. Regardless of the outcome, the overall strength of both great immortal sects would definitely be greatly affected. Perhaps, this would be the opportunity for some small immortal sects to rise to prominence. Pilgrim Gu he kept talking to Wu Qi for at least the time it took to finish a meal. Wu Qi was soaked in sweat as he listened to the conversation, and he nearly cursed out loud. Can you stand having 10,000 flies whispering in your ears? All the immortals smiled and nodded their heads. Apart from some heaven immortals who were on friendly terms with Huiling sect, 99% of the people did not take Reverend Huilin's words seriously. You think Huiling sect is going to win? I don't think so, right? Huiling sect and Yuan Hua sect had been fighting for that energy stone planet for over 1,000 years. Yuan Hua sect had only lost a group of nascent divinity and nascent soul disciples, while Huiling sect had lost an elder with an overall strength of 35th tier. Speaking of losses, Huiling sect had far more losses than Yuan Hua sect. Are you sure you can win today? Chapter 398. These small landmasses possessed a very strong offensive and defensive strength. In fact, they were war tools created by the human race, and were called war cities. At that time, there were a total of 8 strongest war cities of the human race, named after the 8 wisest and strongest emperors of the human race, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. Those war cities even had the power to fight head-on against the strongest gods of the ancient god race. Between the heavenly realms was a chaotic starry sky. It was a primordial chaos that even the great Saint Pangu could not open up. It was filled with violent energy tides that even primordial immortals dared not to step into. Energy tides of various Xiantian level would explode from time to time, and ordinary immortals would be torn to shreds by just touching a tiny bit of the energy waves. 220 cultivators from both immortal sects stepped onto their sword beams and flew towards the small landmass at top speed. Immortal Chuan pointed at the ancient mansion, smiled at Reverend Huilin, and said, "With the mysterious restrictive spells on this piece of land, it can provide for the needs of several tens of heaven immortals and several tens of thousands of cultivators." Immortal Chuan showed his teeth and smiled. His face was flushed, and he looked very proud of himself. Taoist Qi cupped his fist and said, "All the disciples of Yuan Hua sect are upright and above board, and we never do anything shady." The few immortal monarchs and heaven immortals shook their heads indifferently, then nodded again. Carefully, Immortal Chuan led the group of immortals and opened up a small tunnel in the chaotic starry sky, traveling several tens of thousands of miles. It was just a short distance of several tens of thousands of miles, but it had already made these immortals gasp for breath, and made their faces turn pale with fear, cold sweat trickling down their backs. Wu Qi, who was pondering the stories of the ancient human race told by Immortal Chuan, nearly burst out laughing when he heard Immortal Chuan's words. This Immortal Chuan was really good at doing business. No wonder he would follow Reverend Huilin to Yuanhua sect to be the notary, and increase the bet by such a huge amount. Apparently, he was waiting for some unlucky disciple from both immortal sects to lose their important land, and then purchase this mansion filled with abundant natural energy from him. Laughing loudly, Immortal Chuan pointed his finger at the mansion. Immortal Chuan spread his arms and said with a bitter smile, "If I had gained some benefits from it, I wouldn't have asked all of you to come here." Ben Jun spent several years turning over every blade of grass and every tree, but didn't find anything good. However, I don't have enough power to destroy the mansion in the core of the Forgotten Manor. Therefore, I intentionally announced it to the public. Which immortal friend has the ability to benefit from it? After this battle, you can go and try your luck. It will be a great story. Taoist Master Huilin said in a cold voice, "The disciples of my Huiling sect would never do such a disgraceful thing." From afar, this small landmass looked like a delicate bonsai. There were mountains, lakes, rivers, flowers, and trees. There was even a small fireball hovering above the landmass. It revolved around the landmass like a sun, providing heat and light for the living beings on the landmass. There should be some good things in the mansion of the ancient human race. But they were all extremely troublesome things, and were not very useful to immortal cultivators. Therefore, although the mansion was very attractive, its attraction was more in the mansion itself, not the treasures in it. However, according to the unwritten rule of immortals, since Immortal Chuan had found this mansion, all the other immortals had the right to fight for the treasures in it, but the mansion itself belonged to Immortal Chuan. If not for that, why would Immortal Chuan bring so many immortals here in such a generous manner? Suddenly, a strong natural energy came rushing at them from the front. Wu Qi and all the cultivators from Yuanhua sect had rushed into the mansion. The starry sky was filled with chaotic airflows. If an ordinary immortal accidentally let them invade his body, the effect would be no different from injecting the venom of a poisonous snake into the blood vessels of a mortal. Apart from those almighty experts who had transcended the realm of primordial immortal by cultivating innate cultivation techniques, no immortal dared to let the chaotic airflows get close to them. On top of that, the chaotic airflows were extremely heavy. Just a strand of chaotic airflow as thin as a hair was 100 times heavier than a lofty mountain. It was not hard to imagine how much immortal energy it would take to open up a safe passage in such a starry sky. As Wu Qi was flying forward while holding Princess Zhang Li's little hand, Guru Guhi's voice suddenly rang out in his ears, "Little friend, there is a fate between you and the Buddha. If you encounter any danger during the match, you just have to shout, 'Master, save me,' and I'll definitely do my best to save you. Little friend, if you join the Buddhist League, you will find endless happiness. If you are willing to cultivate in seclusion, there are countless beautiful sceneries in the land of ultimate bliss. If you are interested in dual cultivation, there is also the Great Joy Zen technique in the Buddhist League. I have a senior brother who is an outstanding talent in that technique. I can let you join his sect." After entering the spherical space, all the immortals breathed out a heavy sigh of relief and felt completely at ease. It made sense, as the natural energy in the vicinity of the mansion was really rich, even much richer than that of Myriad Immortals' planet. Although the landmass was a little smaller, the density of natural energy was very high. If one were to compare it seriously, the total amount of natural energy here was about the same as that of Greencliff Planet. If either Huiling sect or Yuanhua sect were to lose their headquarters today, this ancient mansion could really serve as a temporary shelter for them. In the ancient times, it was before the establishment of the celestial court. At that time, the ancient gods were still the rulers of the heaven and earth, while the human race was rising rapidly. Under the leadership of the human emperor, The human race used a mystic technique to take down the fragments of Pangu continent, creating a small landmass like the one in front of them, allowing them to roam the sky above the human race's territory. Right in the center of the landmass, between the mountains and the shores of lakes, the ruins of a few cities could be vaguely seen. Originally, these cities were very large in scale, with city walls measuring several tens of miles in both width and length, and standing over 100 feet tall. It was not hard to tell how magnificent these cities were in the past. But now, these city walls had collapsed to the ground, and all that was left of the houses in the cities were broken walls. The few cities were filled with an air of dilapidation. After that, the heaven and earth fell into chaos. When he said this, Immortal Chuan's description was a little vague. Clearly, he did not know much about this period of history. In short, the human race eventually became the rulers of the heaven and earth, while the immortals soared above the 9 heavens. On the other hand, the war cities of the human race that once roamed the universe were either destroyed or lost in the vast chaotic starry sky, drifting aimlessly in all directions. Instinctively, Wu Qi exercised his mystic eyes of universe and gave the surroundings a glance, and he nearly let out a cry. Beside him, Reverend Miao Miao said with a smile, "In short, we have to fight with our true strength, and no cheating is allowed." In this era where natural energy was scarce and resources were scarce, an ancient mansion that could absorb chaotic airflow and transform it into natural energy was a great temptation to all the immortal sections. If Immortal Chuan auctioned it, he could get a lot of benefits. The group of immortals stared quietly at the small landmass. Reverend Miao Miao said with a half-joking and half-serious tone, "Immortal Chuan, I suppose you must have obtained countless benefits from discovering this ancient mansion? Haha, I wonder if you can show it to us?" Immortal Chuan continued, "In this life and death match, neither side is allowed to use immortal-grade talismans, immortal-grade thunderbolts, or any other consumable offensive magical treasures. Otherwise, they will lose on the spot. Medicinal pills and demon pets are allowed to be used. Of course, fellow immortals, with your keen eyes, if any one of you uses a demon pet whose overall strength does not match its master's, we, the few of us, will judge the immortal sect he belongs to as the loser." A bright flame flickered in the void, stretching for several tens of miles. Immortal Chuan and the other 4 immortal monarchs led the group of immortal officials to clear a path in the front. All the heaven immortals exerted their powers at the same time, forming a long stream of light that flew at top speed in the void. In just a blink of an eye, they had traveled tens of millions of miles, and very soon, they arrived at the edge of Puyo Heavenly Realm. Reverend Huilan's lips twitched as he gave Immortal Chuan a glance. After advancing carefully for several tens of thousands of miles, a spherical space with the diameter of about 10,000 miles suddenly appeared amidst the tumbling void. An enormous restrictive force had opened up such a safe space in this chaotic starry sky, which was filled with rich natural energy. A strange golden light filled the surroundings as a small landmass, measuring about 1,000 miles in both width and length, was hovering quietly in front of them. Everyone's attention was attracted by this space. When no one was paying attention, Wu Qi nimbly threw something to the side. Narrowing his eyes, Wu Qi knew that Lady Dark Goldwater was an idiot who only focused on cultivation and knew nothing about anything else. Therefore, she did not have any impression of a mansion of the human race in her memory. Shaking his head, Wu Qi turned to Immortal Greenstaff and asked in a low voice, "Ancestral Master, what is the origin of this mansion of the human race?" The restrictive force that opened up this spherical space in the chaotic starry sky was coming from the core of that landmass. Chaotic airflows kept rushing into this space, and were transformed by the restrictive force into the normal natural energies of 5 elements. A rich natural energy kept bursting out from the landmass, and the surrounding spherical space seemed to be expanding slowly. All the immortals on the scene had sharp ears. Upon hearing Wu Qi's question, Immortal Chuan turned to give Wu Qi a look. When he found out that Wu Qi was the young man who had given him a large sum of bribes, he immediately had a good impression of him. Immortal Chuan nodded amiably, smiled and said, "If that is the case, I'll tell you the origin of this mansion of the human race. Fellow immortals have brought quite a number of juniors here, and it is a good thing to let them gain some knowledge. Upon hearing Immortal Chuan's words, the group of immortals became excited like flies who had smelled the scent of blood. They fixed their eyes on the disciples of two immortal sects, secretly calculating the chances of winning. The sound of a jade bell rang out, as Immortal Chuan smiled and said, "That will be the best." Disciples of Huiling sect and Yuanhua sect quickly enter the mansion. The match will officially begin at noon 3 days later. During this period of time, you can familiarize yourselves with the terrain, adjust your aura, or simply try your luck and see if you can find some good treasures. Pilgrim Gu He's nagging kept buzzing in Wu Qi's spiritual ocean like a fly that could not be killed. Helpless, Wu Qi rolled his eyes and sealed off all his 6 senses. Only then did he manage to isolate himself from Pilgrim Gu He's nagging. Some of these mansions had drifted into the depths of the vast and immeasurable chaotic starry sky, while some had drifted for countless years due to the chaotic tide. Occasionally, they would be pushed close to a heavenly realm, and sometimes, they would even break into the normal starry sky of a heavenly realm. Whenever this happened, the lucky immortal monarch in charge of the heavenly realm would receive an unexpected windfall. The price of a mansion was indeed not cheap. Smiling, Immortal Chuan clapped his hands and said, "Come, come! Fellow immortal monarchs, today is the day of the match between Huiling sect and Yuanhua sect. For the sake of a planet of energy stones, both immortal sects will each send out 10 nascent divinity cultivators and 100 nascent soul cultivators to fight in this mansion. No matter what, the disciple of whichever sect can walk out from this mansion in the end will be able to occupy the planet of energy stones for himself." Immortal Chuan nodded his head reservedly, then began to tell them about the origin of the mansion of the human race. Chapter 399. With his cultivation base skyrocketing, Wu Qi exercised his mystic eyes of universe, and could see every single blade of grass and every tree on this vast landmass. Just as Immortal Chuan had said, he didn't find any benefits in this place, because Wu Qi had also discovered that all the flowers, grasses, and trees on this landmass were ordinary species, and not even a single ginseng could be found. Even if these ordinary flowers, grasses, and trees had absorbed more natural energies over the years, what was the point? Not to mention that these plants had not absorbed much natural energies. Although the natural energies in the vicinity of this landmass were very rich, the natural energies on this landmass were very sparse. Through the observation of Wu Qi's mystic eyes of universe, he could see a grayish-white beam of light was absorbing the natural energies in the vicinity at the core of this landmass, which was also the source of the powerful restrictive spells. The restrictive spells of the ancient mansion were very magical, as they could transform the chaotic airflows into natural energies of the 5 elements and release them. Meanwhile, the grayish-white beam of light was absorbing a large amount of natural energies emitted by this landmass. However, it was obvious that this grayish-white beam of light had developed a preliminary spirituality, as it was absorbing natural energies at a certain speed, which didn't affect the operation of the restrictive spells of the ancient mansion. On top of that, it was still able to support the continuous expansion of the spherical space around the mansion. The larger the spherical space was, the larger its surface area would be, and the larger its contact with the chaotic airflows would be. Thus, it would be able to absorb and transform more chaotic airflows. This grayish-white beam of light was very clever. It absorbed 70% of the natural energies transformed by the restrictive spells, and used the remaining 20% to maintain the operation of the restrictive spells. Meanwhile, it released the remaining 10% of natural energies, which gradually expanded the spherical space around it. When Wu Qi's mystic eyes of universe swept across the grayish-white beam of light, his heart began to race. This was the innate yin energy of yin and yang, the purest yin energy among the innate yin and yang energies, the source of all the yin energy in the world. The innate chaos was transformed into yin and yang, and the so-called taiji transformed into yin and yang. The grayish-white light was the innate yin qi in the yin and yang qi. It was also one of the 2 yin qi that Wu Qi needed to cultivate the 7 foundation elevating technique, which was the next cultivation method of the 7 foundation building technique. Originally, the scroll of stealing had recorded some places that produced innate energies. However, those places were either very far away from the Puyo heavenly realm where Wu Qi was now, and Wu Qi did not have the ability to go there, or they were located in some extremely dangerous places, where even if Wu Qi went there, he would be turned into ashes in a puff of smoke. Therefore, Wu Qi was so happy to be able to find a wisp of innate yin qi here that he almost shouted out loud. However, under the watchful eyes of all the immortals, over 1,000 heaven immortals were using their Dharma eyes to observe every move made by Wu Qi and his companions. Their powerful divine will had locked down everything around them, so how could Wu Qi have the chance to collect the innate yin energy? But without the innate yin energy, how was Wu Qi going to cultivate the 7 foundation elevating technique to the next level? Currently, he had 10 innate nascent souls in his 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls, and the 7 foundation elevating technique required him to shatter these nascent souls, fuse them with the innate yin and yang energies, and eventually form an innate nascent divinity. No matter what, Wu Qi had to get his hands on this yin energy. His eyes darting from side to side, Wu Qi pulled Princess Zhang Li's tender hand and landed on the ground. The place where Yuan Hua sect's disciples landed was next to a small lake. It was a place with lush water plants and beautiful sceneries, making it a good place to set up camp. All the disciples of Yuan Hua sect who participated in the life and death match were from White Cloud Immortal sect, and 70% of them had the surname Jiang. All of them were blood relatives of the same clan, and with the elders of Jiang clan taking care of them, they moved in an orderly manner. Very soon, they began to deploy various defensive mechanisms and traps around the lake. Several hundred miles away, the group of over 100 disciples from Huiling sect was divided into 5 groups, obviously led by 5 peak-stage nascent divinity cultivators. They were noisy when they moved, and only after a full 15 minutes after they landed on the ground did they begin to slowly deploy all kinds of defensive formations under the command of a nascent divinity cultivator who was appointed as the leader. However, it was obvious that there was a grudge between the people of these 5 factions, as their cooperation was sloppy, and their efficiency was shockingly low. High up in the sky, Taoist Qi nodded his head happily and said with a smile, "We now have 70% chance of winning." Meanwhile, Reverend Huilin's face was extremely unsightly. He gave a fierce glare at Immortal Kuhi, who was standing next to him with an unsightly expression, and scolded him with a voice transmission. "So, these are the good disciples you found? Look at them, then look at those Yuan Hua sect disciples on the opposite side. If not because I have the confidence to defeat that old fart Yuan Hua, wouldn't our sect have lost a treasured planet of energy stones for no reason?" Immortal Kuhi bowed his head helplessly with a long face. He also found it strange that all the disciples of Yuan Hua sect who participated in the life and death match were so obedient. Under the lead of a cultivator, all of them were doing what they were supposed to do, just like a group of filial sons and grandsons carrying out tasks assigned by their patriarch. Immortal Kuhi did not expect that his guess was right. The leader of Yuan Hua sect's disciples in this life and death match was Jiang Xiaoxiao, a peak-stage nascent divinity cultivator, commonly known as Taoist Xiao. Furthermore, 70% of the disciples of Jiang clan were his sons and grandsons. As for the other 30% who were not from Jiang clan, most of them had the surname Lu. However, Lu Yue, Jiang Xiaoxiao's partner in dual cultivation, was the patriarch of these Lu clansmen, and she was also one of the 10 peak-stage nascent divinity cultivators sent by Yuan Hua sect in this life and death match. With her around, all the cultivators with the surname Lu were naturally very obedient. In less than 2 hours, while the disciples of Huiling sect were still idling, under the command of Taoist Xiao and Lu Yue, Wu Qi and the others had already constructed a city made of clay, measuring about 1 mile in both width and length. It was surrounded by countless restrictive formations, forming a powerful defensive and early warning system. When everything was done, Taoist Xiao, who always wore a smile on his face, cried out loudly, "Disciples of Yuan Hua sect, listen up. build your own tents, circulate your energy, and regulate your breath. 3 days later, we will fight a life and death match with the disciples of Huiling sect. All the disciples of Yuan Hua sect answered at the same time. Right in the middle of the city made of clay, they pulled out the white tents they brought with them and pitched several dozens of tents according to the positions of the 8 trigrams. After that, they hid in the tents and began to regulate their breath, trying their best to adjust themselves to the best condition. The group of immortals hovering in the sky shook their heads and shifted their attention away from the disciples of Yuan Hua sect, turning to look at the 110 disciples of Huiling sect with a smile on their faces. These people were still weakly deploying formations and traps. However, the gaps between the various formations they deployed were large enough for a horse to run, and no one knew what the purpose of these restrictive formations was. Some immortals who were not very kind suddenly burst into loud laughter. Without giving any face to Reverend Huilin, they began to make comments on these disciples of Huiling sect who were going to participate in the tournament. There were even some immortals who were mean by nature who simply grabbed their own disciples, using the vastly different performance of the disciples of Huiling sect and Yuan Hua sect as a teaching material to teach their own disciples a lesson, telling them that they must live in harmony and be as smart and capable as the disciples of Yuan Hua sect, and that they must never be like those useless fools from Huiling sect. Reverend Huilin's face turned uglier and uglier. Gradually, his eyes were filled with pale golden blood veins, as he stared at immortal Kuhi furiously. If he knew this was going to be such a disgrace, he would have asked his own disciples from Huiling sect to participate in the battle. However, those nascent divinity and nascent soul disciples of Huiling sect had suffered a great loss in the battle with Yuan Hua sect. Left with no other choice, immortal Kuhi had to find a group of outer sect disciples as his disciples. These disciples were the disciples of 4 outer sect disciples, together with a peak stage nascent divinity cultivator from Huiling sect, and over 20 cultivators led by a peak stage nascent divinity cultivator from Huiling sect. But obviously, such a hodgepodge of disciples was not as strong as the disciples of Yuan Hua sect. Jiang Yun? How could that young fellow bring up such a group of obedient and capable disciples? Reverend Huilin's heart felt heavy. For the first time in his life, he was not optimistic about the future of Huiling sect. It was a sign of prosperity for Yuan Hua sect to have such smart, capable, obedient, and organized disciples. On the other hand, why did the disciples of Huiling sect seem to be in a state of decline? On the other hand, those heaven immortals who were part of the top 10 sects in Puyuo heavenly realm, like Yuan Hua sect and Huiling sect, were thoughtfully sizing up the disciples of the 2 immortal sections. Their eyes were flickering. Obviously, their attitude towards Yuan Hua sect and Huiling sect would undergo a subtle change in the future. Pulling Princess Zhongli's hand, Wu Qi squeezed into a spacious and lofty tent. After that, without saying anything, he put his arms around Princess Zhonglu and gave her a deep kiss. As Wu Qi's eyes flickered, Princess Zhonglu, who was very familiar with Wu Qi, widened her eyes and rolled her pretty eyes. Then, cooperatively, she tangled her warm little tongue with Wu Qi's. As the 2 of them did this, the few strands of divine sense that were left on their bodies immediately moved away. All the heaven immortals present were reputable figures, and they would never do something like peeping on their juniors. Even if there were some people with bad conduct who liked to do such a thing, they would never make a fool of themselves in front of so many people of similar status. Therefore, with just a deep kiss, Wu Qi had created an excellent condition for himself. With a sway of his body, Wu Qi took a step back, drilling into the ground like a stream of water. A celestial fiend puppet squeezed out of the ground and transformed into Wu Qi's appearance, sitting cross-legged on the ground while groaning, discussing some superficial Tao of talismans with Princess Zhonglu. Princess Zhonglu was sitting cross-legged in front of the puppet, pretending to be discussing some superficial Tao of talismans. Exercising an innate escape art, Wu Qi smoothly avoided 19 layers of defensive mechanisms and quickly approached the core of the landmass, where a cave abode was excavated underground. This was the cave abode that Immortal Chuan said he could not break. The last few layers of defensive mechanisms in the cave abode were indeed very powerful and extremely complicated. Wu Qi could see through the ins and outs of these restrictive spells, but he really did not have the ability to open them. Perhaps, the person who constructed them had an overall strength equivalent to an upper-tier gold immortal. There was no way Wu Qi could break them. For example, Wu Qi knew that he could blow up a stone wall with explosives, but his strength was only equivalent to 1 or 2 grams of explosives. He could only blow up stones for fun, and could not do anything to a stone wall that was 1,000 feet thick. In the face of such powerful defensive mechanisms, one would need a very strong cultivation base to break them. Taking a deep breath, Wu Qi carefully hid himself outside one of the powerful defensive mechanisms, releasing just a tiny bit of his innate 5 elements aura. Abruptly, the innate Yin energy hidden in the core of the cave abode moved, transforming into a beam of white light and piercing through the layers of defensive mechanisms effortlessly, quickly coming before Wu Qi. After briefly sensing the aura emanated from Wu Qi, the innate Yin energy fused into Wu Qi's body without hesitation. A stream of cold air flowed through his body. Wu Qi took a deep breath and carefully exercised the 7 foundation establishment technique, guiding the innate Yin energy into the innate Yin meridians in his arms, making it stay there safely. Right after the innate Yin energy fused with the Yin meridians, all the energy in Wu Qi's body began to surge and surge like a rioting mob. Chapter 400. As soon as the innate Yin energy entered his body, Wu Qi's fleshly body, which was tempered by the mystic technique of scroll of stealing, immediately went through a tremendous transformation. Every single cell in his body was cheering as they absorbed the subtle aura emanating from the Yin energy. In just a brief moment, Wu Qi's body, which had become sharp because of practicing the flood dragon transformation technique, and his bulging muscles, had suddenly become smooth, and harmonious. An endless stream of Yin energy was flowing and circulating in Wu Qi's body. With a slight twist of his body, Wu Qi's body began to twist and wriggle like water. He took a deep breath, and his body became as hard as steel, while his muscles began to bulge out from under his skin. The innate Yin energy was circulating crazily in his body. As the innate Yin energy was the most restrained, Wu Qi's innate energies of 5 elements were shrinking rapidly like mud under a 10,000-ton hydraulic press. In just the time of 2 to 3 breaths, the innate energies that filled all the meridians in Wu Qi's body had been compressed to 1/10 of their original volume. The energy contained in each unit of innate energies had increased by 10 times. Perhaps the power of an ordinary fire thunder spell cast by Wu Qi was comparable to the raging thunderstrike, which was unleashed by a peak-stage nascent divinity cultivator by consuming a huge amount of energy. On top of that, as the innate Yin energy was restrained and hidden, Wu Qi's aura had also become faintly discernible, and was even comparable to that of an ordinary human. It was stated in the scroll of stealing that only when one had absorbed the innate Yin energy, could all the escape techniques of hiding one's whereabouts in the scroll of stealing be cultivated to the ultimate stage. Now, even if Wu Qi did not use the mystic technique to restrain his aura, as long as he walked into a crowd of mortals, ordinary immortals would think that he was just a mortal. Feeling the magical transformation in his body, Wu Qi shook his head in a happy yet troubled manner and breathed out a long sigh. His innate energies had been reduced by 90%. Even with the speed of his 10 nascent souls breathing at the same time, it would still take him some time to replenish the consumed innate energies. Of course, this was a good thing. But after a few days of hard work, his meridians would be filled up again. Unwilling to give up, Wu Qi looked at the ancient restrictive spell that was emitting a faint bronze light like an iron wall in front of him. He shook his head and quickly returned to the ground. The scroll of stealing did mention all sorts of tricks to solve this kind of restrictive spell that was left behind from the ancient times. However, currently, Wu Qi did not have the ability to break it, so he could only look at it and sigh. But with this innate Yin Qi, it was worth it, everything was worth it. As long as he could find the innate yin and yang qi, he would be able to cultivate the 7 foundation elevating technique, using the innate yin and yang qi as the heaven and earth furnace and his own body as the cauldron, crushing his nascent soul that contained his 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls, and forging his innate nascent divinity in an unprecedented way. An innate primordial spirit that had fused with the innate yin and yang and the 5 elements was an existence comparable to an immortal soul. Once his innate primordial spirit was formed, Wu Qi had officially embarked on a path of cultivation that was completely different from the current cultivation world. The end of this path would lead straight to the true great Tao of the heaven and earth, but it would depend on whether Wu Qi had the luck to reach that point. As the innate yin qi entered his body, the hasik in Wu Qi's spiritual ocean let out a joyful sigh and said, "Little fellow, your luck is really wonderful. Perhaps I should address you as master in advance? As long as you possess the overall strength of a gold immortal, I'll be at your beck and call, and I'll never regret it." Carefully and stealthily, the hasik extracted a thread of the innate yin qi that was flowing in Wu Qi's body. After that, it let out a joyful cry and fused the extremely magical energy into its own soul, then fell into a deep sleep comfortably in Wu Qi's spiritual ocean. To Wu Qi, the loss of this thread of innate yin qi was nothing. The innate yin qi that had fused with his 7 profound yin meridians was constantly absorbing the innate energy essence exhaled by Wu Qi's nascent soul, transforming it into new innate yin qi. Bringing with him a comfortable and cool feeling, Wu Qi leaped back to the ground and soundlessly fused with the celestial fiend puppet. He smiled and nodded at Princess Zhonglu, then pulled her hand. Once again, both of them were entangled with each other. Once again, several dozens of divine wills swept across the tent, then quickly retreated as if they had just seen a ghost. 3 days later, these immortals no longer sent their divine wills near Wu Qi and Princess Zhongli's tent. The small fireball hovered high up in the sky, and everyone's shadows were right under their feet. Noon had arrived. Immortal Chuan's loud cry was heard coming from the void. The life and death match between Yuanhua sect and Huiling sect has officially begun. The winner of both sides will occupy that energy stone planet. In this match, no one-time use items such as talismans or yin thunderbombs are allowed to be used, and there are no other restrictions. In the end, the immortal sect with a disciple who survived will be the winner. Taoist Shao gave a long and sonorous cry, shooting up into the sky together with a green sword beam. Looking at the direction where the disciples of Huiling's sect had set up their camp, he cried out sternly, "Fellow Taoists from Huiling's sect, is there anyone who dares to fight me?" It was just a distance of several hundred miles. Even though some cultivators did not have the ability to see through this distance with naked eyes, the divine will of peak-stage nascent soul cultivators was more than enough to cover this space. Therefore, when Taoist Shao shouted out his challenge, several dozens of divine wills from Huiling's sect had already enveloped the area. All the disciples of Yuanhua sect who were participating in the life and death match flew up into the sky. Lu Wuyue, who had white hair but a face as beautiful as a young girl, hovered side by side in midair with Taoist Shao. Laughing loudly, she said, "I'm Wuyue. Is there any fellow Taoist who is willing to give me some advice?" The other 8 peak-stage nascent divinity cultivators of Yuanhua sect flew up into the sky one after another, hovering in midair and shouting, "We'll be waiting for you, fellow Taoists." Before their voices could fade away, a loud boom of wind and flame was heard coming from a distance. A small hill, about 1 mile tall and several miles in circumference, suddenly left the ground and flew up into the sky. The underside of the hill was surrounded by a strong, pitch-black wind, while a raging fire was burning on top of it. The scorching temperature of the flame turned the entire hill red, as if it would melt at any time. Large fireballs broke off from the hill and fell down, flying at top speed towards Wu Qi and his company, bringing with them a strong gust of wind. It took the time it took to finish a meal to fly tens of miles high up into the sky, and only then did it arrive above the earthen city built by Wu Qi and his company. The strong, dark wind under the hill dissipated abruptly, and the hill began to fall back down. A bright red light towered up into the sky from the top of the hill, and a great amount of heat burst out from the red flame. It made Wu Qi and his company feel as if they were in a furnace. While Taoist Xiao and his company were about to fight back, Lord Xianxing had already cried out joyfully, "Fellow disciples, let this little dragon show me what he is capable of." Laughing wildly, Lord Xianxing suddenly transformed into his true form of a flood dragon. A black flood dragon mixed with some golden scales soared up into the sky, his over 3,000 feet long body wriggling up into the sky, then slapped forcefully on the hill with one of his claws. A tremendous hidden force exploded out, and the magic power attached to the hill was shattered by the claw. The huge hill was sent flying backward for some distance, and was about to fall down to the ground. But before the hill could fall, Lord Xianxing had already opened his mouth and recited a few incantations. A tornado rose from the lake next to him, rolling up the flaming hill and sending it flying towards Huiling Sek's base. The speed of the tornado was a few times faster than the dark gale coming from underneath the small hill. Within the time it took to finish a pot of tea, the small hill had arrived right above the Huiling Sek's base. Along with a wild whistling noise, the rapidly spinning small hill smashed down forcefully. The wind had fanned the flames, and more than half of the hill had been melted. Just when a few nascent soul disciples of Huiling Sect sprung up into the sky, preparing to roll the hill back like Lord Xianxing did, Lord Xianxing suddenly glared at them and unleashed an invisible force. The hill exploded abruptly, turning into several hundred huge balls of lava and falling down to the ground. Deafening booms of explosions echoed out one after another, as Huiling Sek's base suddenly turned into a sea of flames. Columns of flame and smoke that reached several miles high could be seen everywhere. The result of Huiling Sek's disciples slacking off and not meticulously constructing their defensive system was now reflected, as nearly half of their defensive formations were destroyed by Lord Xianxing with just one attack. 7 early-stage nascent soul disciples of Huiling Sect were knocked flying away by the explosion. Their defensive magical treasures were ripped to shreds, and blood was spraying all over their bodies. Suddenly, a huge catfish flood dragon sprung down from the sky. The catfish flood dragon, who had grown to over 3,000 feet long, opened her mouth and swallowed the 7 nascent soul cultivators. After that, she opened her mouth and sprayed out a stream of black water, pushing the dozens of nascent soul cultivators far away. Their defensive magical treasures flickered and flickered, producing a series of explosive noises. Wu Qi shook his head as he watched. As Patriarch Yuan Hua feared that his disciples would suffer a loss, he had given each of them a middle-grade spirit weapon and a lower-grade defensive outfit. Now, all the cultivators on the scene were equipped with 2 spirit items, and their overall offensive and defensive strength had improved by at least a few times. But what was going on with Huiling Sect? They were all shabby lower-grade and middle-grade magical treasures, the kind that were poorly crafted. But, after being smashed by Lord Xianxing and Catfish Flood Dragon, they were actually thrown into confusion? While Wu Qi was shaking his head and sighing, the nascent divinity cultivators of Huiling Sect finally struck. 10 beams of cold light shot out, flying straight towards Lord Xianxing and Catfish Flood Dragon. Judging from the luster of the beams and the faintly discernible spirit pressure, it was obvious that they were 10 spirit items. Wu Qi nodded his head inwardly. That made sense. How could Huiling Sect be so poor? Perhaps it was because Reverend Huilin was too stingy. High up in the sky, Reverend Huilin's face turned unsightly. He was indeed too stingy, as he had only given 10 nascent divinity disciples a set of excellent spirit items, and ignored all the nascent soul disciples who participated in the match. In his opinion, it was these 10 nascent divinity disciples who would decide the outcome of the match, and those nascent soul disciples were just cannon fodders who could buy time. Why would they be given excellent spirit items? As the nascent divinity cultivators of Huiling Sect struck, Catfish Flood Dragon and Lord Xianxing, Chi-Chi, let out a dragon roar as they stepped on dark clouds and retreated at top speed. Lord Xianxing opened his mouth and sprayed out several dozens of layers of water shields in front of him. Meanwhile, Catfish Flood Dragon kept spraying out black waves of water. The waves brought with them a bone-piercing coldness and smashed onto the bright beams formed by the spirit items, sending up a large sheet of cold air. In just a few blinks of an eye, Catfish Flood Dragon and Lord Xianxing were forced to flee. Together with 8 other peak-stage nascent divinity cultivators, Daoist Xiao and Lu Wuyue hastily charged forward, while the rest of Yuan Hua Sect's cultivators formed into formations and charged forward as well. Wu Qi let out a long cry as he excitedly pulled Princess Zhang Li's little hand and rushed forward. The spirit-breeding ring flickered with a bright light, as Gold Horn and Silver Horn rushed out with a deafening hiss. 2 beams of red and white intertwined with each other as they shot out. A miserable howl echoed out as a nascent divinity cultivator from Huiling Sect had his body pierced through. All the immortals in the sky looked over in horror, while Reverend Huilin cried out wildly, "Cheater! That guy cheated!" Chapter 401. This doesn't make sense. Absolutely not. Reverend Huilin cried out with his saliva flying all over the place. 5 immortal monarchs, please be careful. The pair of wings on the back of these 2 great pythons is definitely an ancient bloodline. Given their huge size, they are definitely flood dragons, and they have formed their nascent divinities. They are 2 demon immortals of nascent divinity realm. How could a mere nascent soul disciple own such demon pets? Cheating. They are definitely the left hand of Yuan Hua Sect. Reverend Huilin said with a righteous tone, "They know they cannot defeat us, Huiling Sect. That's why they resorted to such a dirty trick." While Reverend Huilin was shouting and protesting, Gold Horn and Silver Horn had already shot out dozens of red and white beams in a row, killing 7 nascent divinity cultivators of Huiling Sect on the spot, while the other 3 were covered in wounds and looked like they were going to fall to the ground soon. Even Daoist Mo Luan's Smoke Luan shield could not withstand the raging flame and cold beams unleashed by the brothers, let alone the spirit items controlled by these nascent divinity cultivators. Wherever the red and white beams went, spirit items were broken and fleshly bodies were damaged. Gold Horn and Silver Horn had shown their mighty power, causing Huiling Sect's cultivators to flee with their arms around their heads, blood and flesh flying in all directions. The brothers and Catfish Flood Dragon opened their big mouths and kept swallowing the blood and flesh that filled the sky. They seemed to be enjoying the feast, but little did they know that Reverend Huilin was already protesting loudly from above. Nevertheless, Reverend Huilin was just protesting, as he was too lazy to save his disciples. What a bunch of useless fools. Let them all die. As long as he could confirm that Yuan Hua Sect's cultivators were cheating, Huiling Sect would win the match. So, what if a few of their disciples died? Wu Qi followed closely behind Gold Horn and Silver Horn. 2 flying swords wheeled and danced in the air, emanating a large sheet of dark light. All of a sudden, a sword beam flashed, as it pierced through the defensive magical treasure of an early-stage nascent soul cultivator in front of him, piercing through his forehead. Suddenly, Gold Horn rushed up, coiled his long tongue, and swallowed the early-stage nascent soul cultivator into his stomach. Initially, Wu Qi only had the sword of Greedy Wolf. However, as he was appreciated by Patriarch Yuan Hua, he was given a flying sword of upper-grade spirit item level, the Chuanhao. This flying sword was made from the cold jade of the seabed and tempered with 10,000 years of Xianbing. It was a pure Yin water attribute flying sword. Just now, Wu Qi had obtained the innate Yin Qi, and the 5 elements energy in his body carried a trace of extreme Yin aura. Coupled with the sword-controlling method in the Xianyin water scripture, he could control the Xuanhao sword with ease and fluency. The sword of Greedy Wolf darted back and forth, clashing head-on with the flying swords of those Huiling Sect cultivators. Every single time, it would break the flying swords and magical treasures of those Huiling Sect cultivators. As for the Xuanhao sword, it brought up a large waterfall and created several tens of large and small whirlpools in the air, pulling all the cultivators of Huiling Sect into them one after another. The huge Yin force silently twisted and pressed down, crushing the defensive treasures of those cultivators, or those nascent soul cultivators themselves, who could not bear the huge pressure, fainted with blood flowing out of their 7 orifices. No matter it was those cultivators whose defensive magical treasures were destroyed, or those who fainted, they would end up in the stomachs of Goldhorn, Silverhorn, and Catfish Flood Dragon. However, the one who was even more efficient than Wu Qi was Princess Zhonglu. A 5-colored divine gleam flickered in her eyes, while an invisible force kept echoing in the air. From time to time, cultivators of Huiling sect would be controlled by Princess Zhonglu with a mystic technique, and obediently put away their defensive magical treasures. Therefore, in broad daylight, there would be a perfect thunderbolt striking down from the sky, striking the dazed cultivator and turning him half-cooked, while emitting an aroma of human flesh that could make one's scalp go numb. On the contrary, these cultivators who were struck by thunderbolts were especially welcomed by Goldhorn and Silverhorn. Later on, the 2 brothers would spend a lot of time around Princess Zhonglu, snatching and devouring these half-cooked cultivators. In just 15 minutes, the disciples of Huiling sect had suffered a crushing defeat, as over 70 of them were killed by Yuanhua sect's swords. However, when they fought back before their death, they were all blocked by the lower-grade defensive spirit items carried by Yuanhua sect's disciples. Even after fighting for so long, not a single Yuanhua sect disciple had a scratch on their skin. Reverend Huilin cried out sternly in the sky, 5 immortal monarchs, the evidence is conclusive, and the facts are clear. Yuanhua sect's disciples are cheating. All the immortals nearby looked at Reverend Huilin contemptuously. Since you know Yuanhua sect's disciples are cheating, why didn't you save your own disciples first? After all, they are the disciples of Huiling sect. If you were to rescue them, you would at most lose a dozen of your men, unlike now, where most of them have been slaughtered by Wu Qi and his men, and only about 20 lucky disciples are still fleeing in panic. All the heaven immortals present could tell that Reverend Huilin was intentionally using the flesh and blood of his own disciples to strengthen his persuasion. The more disciples who were like ants were killed, the more sympathy Reverend Huilin would receive. Perhaps, the 5 immortal monarchs who acted as the judges would have their hearts softened, and declare Yuanhua sect to have lost the match. Of course, as the immortal monarchs of the celestial court, Reverend Huilin did not consider the possibility of their hearts softening. In any case, he just wanted to let all the immortals present here have a good look at how a nascent soul disciple of Yuanhua sect had actually released 2 nascent divinity ancient pythons to participate in the match. According to the rules agreed upon beforehand, this was cheating. And cheating would result in a loss. There was one more thing that Reverend Huilin did not say out loud, and perhaps he was too embarrassed to say it out loud. All the disciples chosen by Huiling sect's disciples are elites who are 1 in 10 million. If not for Wu Qi's cheating, there is no way Huiling sect would have lost the match. However, when Reverend Huilin looked at the shabby lower-grade magical treasures of his own disciples, looked at the lower-grade spirit item outfits worn by Yuanhua sect's disciples, and looked at how they were controlling those powerful spirit items as nimbly as fishes swimming in the water, no matter how thick his face was, he was too embarrassed to say those words out loud. Taoist Qi sneered and said, "Senior Huilin, I'll address you as senior here. But I hope senior will not speak carelessly and accuse Yuanhua sect for no reason. Those 2 great pythons are indeed the demon pets subdued by our disciple, Wu Qi. Half a month ago, they transcended their heavenly tribulation in Green Cliff Mountain and formed their nascent divinities. Yuanhua sect is not cheating." Not allowing Reverend Huilin to say anything, Taoist Qi sneered and said, "The few immortal monarchs have agreed upon the rules of the match. How could Yuanhua sect be so stupid to do something as foolish as putting themselves in a desperate situation and giving others a handle?" Immortal Chuan pondered for a brief moment, then exchanged a glance with the few immortal monarchs standing next to him, then nodded slightly at the same time. Reverend Gu he gave a loud laugh, then suddenly raised his hand and drew a line in the air. A beam of golden Buddhist light shot down like a wall, crossing the landmass underneath and separating Wu Qi and the disciples of Huiling sect. With a deep voice, Reverend Gu he cried out, "Buddha is merciful. Yuanhua sect has gained an absolute advantage in the first match today. There is no reason for us to kill anymore. Let's call it a day. Reverend Gu he only said that Yuan Hua sect had gained an absolute advantage, but he did not say that Yuan Hua sect had won the match. Obviously, he wanted to check the relationship between Gold Horn and Silver Horn, as well as Wu Qi. He wanted to make sure that Yuan Hua sect did not cheat, only then he could decide the outcome of the match. At this point in time, only 3 nascent divinity cultivators were left standing among the disciples of Huiling sect. However, they were all covered in blood. Reverend Gu he stepped forward and separated both sides. Immediately, the 3 nascent divinity cultivators from Huiling sect fell to the ground, panting like mortals. One after another, all the immortals descended to the ground, surrounding Gold Horn and Silver Horn curiously. They were frowning, and some of them even stole glances at Wu Qi with different thoughts in their minds. Wu Qi could sense the malice in these people's hearts, and he knew that they were coveting Gold Horn and Silver Horn. However, Wu Qi was not afraid of them. As long as he did not leave Green Cliff Planet easily, who could touch even a single hair of his? Immortal Chuan took a few rounds around Gold Horn and Silver Horn, nodded his head, and said with a smile, "They are indeed extraordinary. I think these 2 strange pythons are the legendary dragon pythons of fire and ice, right? I've read about them in the rare books found in the Celestial Court. Little friend Wu Qi, what a great fortune you have." Wu Qi cupped his fist and bowed to the Reverend, then said with a deep voice, "You flatter me, immortal monarch. Wu Qi is just lucky." Knowing what these immortals wanted to investigate, Wu Qi beckoned at Gold Horn and Silver Horn, then said with a smile, "Gold Horn, Silver Horn, reveal your nascent divinity, and let these senior immortals see the relationship between you and me." With a sway of his body, a large sheet of clouds rushed out from around him, and a white cloud carried Wu Qi's fake nascent soul as it flew out. As this fake nascent soul was cultivating White Cloud Immortal Sect's energy unity mystic technique, it was surrounded by a large sheet of light clouds. In the hands of the fake nascent soul, there were 2 beams of red and white light hovering in midair. Gold Horn and Silver Horn bowed their heads. A beam of red and a beam of white light shot out from between their brows, transforming into the shadows of 2 great pythons and slithering quickly around Wu Qi. Gold Horn and Silver Horn's nascent divinity was strong and ferocious. One was shrouded in raging flame, while the other was shrouded in icy wind. Inside and outside their nascent divinities, countless restrictive runes could be vaguely seen. As all the Heaven Immortals were experts in this field, they could tell with just one glance that Gold Horn and Silver Horn's nascent divinities were resonating with the light on Wu Qi's palms. Obviously, their nascent divinities were completely controlled by Wu Qi. Reverend Huilin cried out sternly, "This does not prove that Wu Qi has subdued these 2 great pythons." Wu Qi sighed, shook his head and said, "I can swear to the heaven that Gold Horn and Silver Horn are demon pets that I personally subdued. Actually, if Gold Horn and Silver Horn were demon immortals of Heaven Immortal Realm, Wu Qi would be suspected of cheating. However, they had just formed their nascent divinities, and all the senior immortals could tell with just one glance that they had just formed their nascent divinities a few days ago." Cheating? Where did that come from? Taoist Qi snorted coldly, gave Reverend Huilin a sidelong glance, and said mockingly, "Could it be that Senior has no choice but to twist words and force logic?" Reverend Huilin bellowed furiously, "I can't lose? Taoist Qi, how dare you?" Immortal Chuan and the other few immortal monarchs exchanged a glance, then shook their heads at the same time. Clearly, Reverend Huilin was not a man of integrity. It was his own disciples who did not live up to his expectations, and it was fine if they lost, but why did he have to accuse Wu Qi of cheating? Nevertheless, no matter how they looked at it, there was nothing doubtful about Wu Qi's subduing of these 2 great pythons. It could only be said that Wu Qi was too lucky, and that was why he could get such a great reward. Without giving Reverend Huilin any chance to say more, Immortal Chuan cried out in a deep voice, "Yuan Hua sect is the winner of this match. No more objections." He gave Reverend Huilin a glance, whose face had turned livid, and said coldly, "The second match will now begin." Patriarch Yuan Hua of Yuan Hua sect and Reverend Huilin of Huiling sect, please get ready for the duel. Reverend Huilin's expression flickered, and he suddenly burst into a loud laughter. Yuan Hua, old fogey, where are you? Reverend Huilin became arrogant again. The smile had returned to his face, as if the crushing defeat just now had never happened. Chapter 402. Wu Qi stared coldly at Reverend Huilin, who was acting so arrogant and domineering. How could a guy like him cultivate to such a level? Reverend Huilin paid no attention to Wu Qi's meaningful gaze. He just raised his head and cried out loudly, "Yuan Hua, come out and fight me." His sonorous voice echoed across 10,000 miles in all directions. If Patriarch Yuan Hua were in the space where the ancient mansion was located, he would definitely be able to hear his voice. But even after Reverend Huilin had called out dozens of times, Patriarch Yuan Hua still did not show up. Reverend Huilin became even more excited. He stared at Immortal Chuan and said loudly, "Immortal Monarch, Yuan Hua is not here. Could it be that he is too scared to show up? Does that mean I've won this match?" Immortal Chuan and the other few immortal monarchs exchanged a glance, hesitating and not daring to make a decision. This matter was related to the ownership of the headquarters of two immortal sects, and with so many immortals watching, if the patriarchs of the two immortal sects didn't have a serious fight to decide the ownership of the Green Cliff Star and Huang Qiao Star, the few immortal monarchs present on the scene would have a bad reputation. For example, would people say that these few immortal monarchs had been bribed by Huiling sect and were intentionally siding with Huiling sect? The celestial court had a strict discipline. Although all immortal monarchs were very motivated, if they wanted to be promoted, their reputation as an official was also an important test. It was for this reason that Immortal Chuan mediated the conflict between Huiling sect and Yuan Hua sect. If several dozens of heaven immortals were killed suddenly in the heavenly realms under his rule, it would definitely leave a heavy mark on his personal file. At least, he would be accused of not having a good control over the situation, and it would be a great obstacle to his future promotion. Every promotion of an immortal monarch represented real benefits. Heavenly realms with richer natural energy, larger territories, more abundant natural resources, and more immortals would be rewarded with corresponding immortal stones and immortal pills. More importantly, with every promotion, they would be able to receive guidance from those almighty experts in the celestial court, and be able to visit those almighty experts' immortal abodes to listen to the teachings of the great Tao. That was the most important thing. Therefore, Immortal Chuan and the others didn't dare to make a rash decision. After all, this matter concerned two great immortal sects. Wu Qi looked at Immortal Chuan and the others, who had their eyeballs darting from side to side, and he immediately felt a great joy in his heart. The status of these people was similar to the village cadres on Earth. The competition between the two immortal sects was like a group fight between the people of two villages. This would have a huge impact on their performance evaluation. A bowl of water must be leveled, otherwise no one would know what would happen next. Coldly looking at Immortal Chuan and the others, Wu Qi recalled the plan they came up with in the Green Cliff Mountain. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the cloud path that he came from. At this time, there should be some movement on the wind-blown plains of Tsong-Tu planet, right? Could Taoist Min succeed? Upon thinking of this, Wu Qi turned to look at the group of eminent cloud sects heaven immortals. As the number one immortal sect in Puyuo Heavenly Realm, Eminent Cloud Sect had a total of 42 heaven immortals. However, there were only 11 of them here today. Of course, as the founding ancestral master of Eminent Cloud Sect, Reverend Yun was sitting cross-legged on the back of a large black crane, looking at Reverend Huilin with a smile on his face. However, Wu Qi felt that there was something wrong with the aura emanating from Reverend Yun. Could it be that the prophecy had really come? Seeing that Immortal Chuan and the other immortal monarchs did not say a word, Reverend Huilin could not help but shout angrily, "Immortal monarchs, since Patriarch Yuan Hua doesn't have the courage to fight, you should declare me the winner. According to the bet, this Green Cliff planet should belong to Huiling sect." Immortal Chuan cleared his throat. While frowning, he was about to say something, but suddenly, a stream of light cut through the chaotic airflow and broke into the ball-shaped space. In just a blink of an eye, Patriarch Yuan Hua had arrived with blood all over his body. The pale golden blood on Patriarch Yuan Hua's body had not dried yet, and was still emanating a very strong wave of immortal energy. Obviously, the blood had just flowed out from the body of an immortal. Patriarch Yuan Hua flicked his long sleeve and wiped away the blood. He coughed violently, then laughed and said with a hoarse voice, "Reverend Huilin, you can't wait any longer? Well then let's do it. Immortal monarchs, please be my witnesses. If Reverend Huilin is killed by my sword today, Huangqiao planet will belong to Yuan Hua sect." Patriarch Yuan Hua coughed again. Golden blood was seen trickling down from the corner of his mouth. Laughing fiercely, he said, "Huilin, come, let's fight to the death." With a wave of his right hand, a misty green cloud shot out from his fingertip, transforming into an immortal sword that looked like it was condensed from clouds and mist. It was faintly discernible, as if it did not have a real body, and began wheeling rapidly around him. This was the prime immortal item, the Cloud Shadow Sword, which Patriarch Yuan Hua had spent several hundred periods of painstaking effort to gradually craft and temper after transcending his tribulation and becoming an immortal. When the sword beam was unleashed, Patriarch Yuan Hua's body turned into a layer of mist, and it was difficult to lock onto him with divine will. Immortal Chuan gave the blood stains on Patriarch Yuan Hua's body a thoughtful look, his brows knitted into a tight frown. With a serious expression, he cried out in a deep voice, "Fine, let's fight according to the bet. No matter who wins, if there is any conflict in the future, it can only be limited to the matter between Yuan Hua sect and Huiling sect. The conflict is not allowed to expand." What Immortal Chuan meant was very clear. If you want to fight and kill each other, that is your freedom. You can take revenge on each other in the future, but you are not allowed to call your friends and make the matter worse. There was a hint of threat in his tone. If you dare to make a scene, don't blame me for using the force of the celestial court to suppress you. Patriarch Yuan Hua cupped his fist and bowed to Immortal Chuan, agreeing to his words. On the other side, Reverend Huilin leaped back about 100 miles. He rubbed his palms together, and a brilliant and strong golden beam shot out from his palms. It was a strange-shaped immortal sword with an ancient design, looking as if it was forged entirely from gold, and was constantly bursting with a large sheet of golden flame. This immortal sword was as wide as a palm and as long as 7 feet. From the tip of the sword to the hilt, a row of 13 fist-sized prismatic crystals were inlaid. Every single crystal flickered with a dazzling red light, and the flames of the light expanded and contracted like the heart of a living being. Wu Qi sucked in a cold breath as he looked at the immortal sword. It was an upper-grade immortal sword, a powerful immortal item that could only be crafted by heaven immortals of at least 18th tier or above, and the item spirit in it had a power equal to at least that of an 18th tier heaven immortal. With Reverend Huilin's overall strength that was equal to, or even slightly weaker than, Patriarch Yuan Hua, how was it possible for him to control an immortal sword of at least 18th tier or above? Could it be that Reverend Huilin had the same innate energy as Wu Qi, and was able to attract an upper-grade immortal item? It did not make sense. When the golden immortal sword was unleashed, the weather immediately changed, and the scorching aura forced all the immortals to retreat. They stared at Reverend Huilin in surprise, and suddenly understood why he had the courage to rush to Green Cliff Planet and fight Patriarch Yuan Hua, and even bet the foundation of his sect on it. With this immortal sword in his hand, Reverend Huilin had the right to do so. It was like a baby challenging another child with a rocket launcher, and it was a sure win. The problem was, when all the heaven immortals present scanned Reverend Huilin with their divine will, they found out that he only had a cultivation base of 28th tier heaven immortal. How could he control an upper-grade immortal sword like this? Immortal items had their own spirits, and they were the proudest of all. Without the corresponding overall strength, how could they be controlled by someone? With the golden immortal sword in his hand, Reverend Huilin laughed complacently and said, "Yuan Hua, I'll kill you with my sword today." Yuanhua sect, hee hee. Reverend Huilin laughed hideously, and the meaning behind his words was clear. As long as he killed Patriarch Yuanhua, Yuanhua sect would no longer need to exist. With an immortal sword that was above 18th tier, Reverend Huilin's overall strength had increased by more than 10 times. He was determined to wipe out Yuanhua sect, and the energy stone planet that the two immortal sects were fighting over would definitely belong to Huiling sect. Although the immortal monarchs of the celestial court were nominally ruling all the heavenly realms, the only decisive factor between immortals was still the overall strength. The strong would win, and the weak would be prey to the strong. This was the eternal truth of immortal cultivators. Wu Qi stared coldly at Reverend Huilin, who was acting arrogantly. No wonder he had such a strong confidence to fight Yuanhua sect. But he reckoned it was not too long ago that he obtained the golden immortal sword. Otherwise, Huiling sect would not have fought Yuanhua sect for over 1,000 years, and still could not decide the ownership of the energy stone planet. According to the time, Reverend Huilin must have obtained the immortal sword just a few days before Wu Qi came to Puyo Heavenly Realm. The few immortal monarchs fixed their eyes on the immortal sword in Reverend Huilin's hand, their faces grave. It was especially true for immortal Chuan, whose face was alternating between blue and pale. With such a powerful immortal sword, Reverend Huilin's overall strength had surpassed immortal Chuan's. In the future, it would be difficult for immortal Chuan to manage Huiling sect. The situation was giving him a headache. Among all the heavenly realms, there were some extremely powerful immortal sects, whose overall strength was so strong that they could ignore the laws of the celestial court. Those immortal monarchs who were in charge of the celestial court were living like their grandchildren, without any power or glory. Immortal Chuan really did not want to become an unlucky fellow like them. However, the golden immortal sword was so powerful that the group of immortals couldn't even stand firmly before it. How were they supposed to fight? While all kinds of thoughts were tumbling in everyone's mind, Patriarch Yuanhua suddenly laughed and said, "Huilin, it seems the item spirit of this immortal sword is severely injured and has fallen into a deep sleep, right? Otherwise, how could you control it?" Reverend Huilin nodded and said, "Yes. When I found it, it was covered in wounds, and its item spirit was on the verge of shattering. I suppose some mighty immortal fell in a battle with someone, and his immortal item accidentally fell into Puyo Heavenly Realm. Luckily I found it." Waving the immortal sword casually, Reverend Huilin let out a long laugh and said, "Yuanhua, if your Yuanhua sect can be merged with Huiling sect, I can." Patriarch Yuanhua shook his head. Without paying any attention to Reverend Huilin, he carefully and respectfully pulled out a strip of cloth from under his sleeve, measuring 6 inches long and 2 fingers wide. It looked like a strip of cloth that was casually torn off from his clothes. A few runes were scribbled on the strip of cloth with pale golden blood, and it was emanating a very faint wave of immortal energy. Patriarch Yuanhua gave Reverend Huilin a cold look, then pointed his finger at the strip of cloth. Suddenly, it burst into flames. A tiny beam of golden light shot out from the strip of cloth, crossing 100 miles of void and lightly falling onto Reverend Huilin's body. Amidst the terrified gazes of all the immortals, Reverend Huilin suddenly vanished into thin air. Chapter 403. The group of immortals was struck with terror, and they took another big step back. Annihilated, completely annihilated. A mighty 28th tier heaven immortal was actually destroyed by Patriarch Yuanhua with that shabby-looking strip of cloth, leaving not even a broken soul behind. Such a power was simply too frightening. Without saying a word, Patriarch Yuanhua sprung forward, grabbed the hilt of the golden immortal sword, and quickly sent his divine will into it. Suddenly, numerous runes lit up on the surface of the immortal sword, and a faint buzzing could be heard coming out of it. In just a blink of an eye, Patriarch Yuanhua's divine will had approached the core of the complicated formation diagram and vaguely came into contact with the item spirit, which was lying dormant in the sword's core. The surrounding immortals suddenly came to their senses. No matter how Reverend Huilin was annihilated, and no matter what method Patriarch Yuan Hua used to suddenly destroy his soul, this immortal sword was simply too tempting. Although the item spirit of an immortal sword of 18th tier and above was severely injured, it could easily recover with some time and energy. With this immortal sword, they would be able to establish the foundation of being the #1 immortal sect in Puyo Heavenly Realm and the surrounding heavenly realms. Several hundred immortals struck at the same time. "Fellow immortal Yuan Hua, please let us have a look at this sword," cried Chi-Chi. Suddenly, the void around Patriarch Yuan Hua shattered, as several hundred huge hands formed from immortal energies reached out and grabbed towards him. But as these huge hands were fighting and struggling with each other, they revealed a big flaw. The Cloud Shadow sword flashed and brought Patriarch Yuan Hua out of the void at top speed. Patriarch Yuan Hua gave a long cry and cried out, "Disciples of Yuan Hua sect, let's go! Immortal Chuan, that Huang Qiao planet belongs to Yuan Hua sect now." Daoist Qi flicked his sleeve. A plume of smoke towered up into the sky, wrapping up Wu Qi and all the disciples who participated in the life and death match, then transformed into a beam of light and fled along with Patriarch Yuan Hua. With the golden immortal sword in hand, Patriarch Yuan Hua flew in the front. Wherever the golden light passed, the chaotic airflow opened up a path, just enough for the disciples who were chasing after him to escape. However, the chaotic airflow had a bizarre nature and was extremely heavy. Even with the golden immortal sword in his hand clearing the way, Patriarch Yuan Hua's speed had dropped by at least 100 times. Although the disciples of Yuan Hua sect fled quickly, they were soon caught up by the immortals behind them. At the very front was Guru Gu He, who had a solemn appearance and was emitting a faint golden light. The string of Buddha beads in his left hand suddenly transformed into hundreds of soft and translucent Buddha lights and shot out, smashing towards Wu Qi and the others like a storm. "Guru Gu," he cried out in a deep voice, "Fellow immortal Yuan Hua, this sword is fated with the Buddhist League. Please put it down and form a good relationship with the Buddhist League." A deep, muffled chanting that sounded like thunder was heard coming from within the over 100 balls of Buddhist light. The disciples of Yuan Hua sect who only possessed the cultivation base of nascent soul realm felt their heads tremble, and one after another, they rolled their eyes and fainted. Daoist Shao and the rest of the 10 nascent divinity disciples were trembling uncontrollably. Although they were protected by the cloud unleashed by Daoist Qi, their nascent divinities were still shaking violently inside their bodies, nearly disintegrating into nothingness. Guru Gu He even slapped his forehead, unleashing a beam of Buddhist light that transformed into a huge claw shaped like the sharp claw of a great rock, grabbing towards Patriarch Yuan Hua. All the immortals could see that a large sheet of golden flame had burst out from the immortal sword in Patriarch Yuan Hua's hand. It looked like Patriarch Yuan Hua was on the verge of wiping out the divine will Reverend Huilin had left in the sword, and was about to brand his own divine will on the severely injured item spirit. Once Patriarch Yuan Hua took control of this severely injured immortal sword, with his cultivation base of peak stage 28th tier, his overall strength would skyrocket by a few times. Even if the few immortal monarchs joined forces, they would still be no match for Patriarch Yuan Hua. Therefore, they had to stop Patriarch Yuan Hua from refining the immortal sword now. As long as they could delay him for a moment and interrupt his refinement process, they would be able to seize the immortal sword with the joint attack of over 1,000 heaven immortals. As for who the immortal sword would belong to in the end, there must be a lucky one, right? And all the immortals felt that they were the lucky one. At that moment, Wu Qi suddenly gave a long cry and waved his left hand. Countless dragon-scaled golden beams shot up into the sky, flying towards the over 100 balls of Buddhist light that Guru Gu He had thrown down with a jarring whistle. The dragon-scaled golden lights hit the Buddha light intensely, causing the Buddha light to burst into muffled bangs. The dragon-scaled golden lights shattered into pieces, but the Buddha light that was falling from above was also deflected by the huge impact of the dragon-scaled golden lights. More than 100 Buddha lights plunged into the chaotic airflow not far away and disappeared after a turn. Guru Gu He was so angry that he nearly coughed blood. The string of Buddhist beads was a precious treasure that he had been carrying with him since he began his cultivation. After being strengthened by his Buddhist power and willpower for countless years, it had become one with his mind, and its power was not weaker than ordinary immortal items. But, after being struck by Wu Qi's attack, the string of Buddhist beads was swept away by the chaotic airflow. Not even a primordial immortal could find such a small string of Buddhist beads in the chaotic starry sky. It was a well-known fact that Buddhist cultivators had always lived a poor life. Usually, they only had 2 or 3 Buddhist treasures, which were the condensation of all their Buddhist power and willpower. They did not pay much attention to other worldly possessions. As for Guru Gu He, he only had this string of Buddhist beads, which was the only Buddhist item he carried with him. All his years of cultivation had been spent on this string of Buddhist beads. Despite the fact that Guru Gu He's cultivation had reached a certain level, he was still so angry that he began to curse out loud. "Damn you, Junior! Give me back my treasure!" Guru Gu He furrowed his brows. He was too lazy to chase after Patriarch Yuan Hua. Instead, he waved his right hand, shooting out a huge claw that looked like the sharp claws of a rock towards Wu Qi's head. If the claw managed to grab hold of Wu Qi, with the gap in their overall strength, Wu Qi would definitely have his bones broken and tendons torn, killing him instantly. At this moment, Guru Gu He did not care whether Wu Qi was fated with the Buddhist League or not. Wu Qi snorted coldly and clenched his jaws tightly. He felt a throbbing pain in his heart. The Earth Element Dragon Scale shield was unleashed just now, and at least 10,000 dragon scales were shattered by the Buddhist beads. It was a precious treasure crafted using the dragon scales that he looted from Wanying Dragon King's ancestral grave. After losing 10,000 dragon scales, both the offensive and defensive strength of the Earth Element Dragon Scale shield had dropped by 40%. "Old bald donkey, give me back my dragon scales." Wu Qi was so angry that he jumped up and down violently. He glared at Guru Gu He, then opened his erect eye. Abruptly, over 100 blinding purple thunderbolts shot out from the cold electric mirror, smashing onto Guru Gu He's body. At the same time, Wu Qi took out all the immortal talismans given to him by Patriarch Jiang Yun, by Xia, and Qing Wu, throwing them behind him as if his life depended on it. Pilgrim Gu He gave a muffled snort. Visible lines of muscles bulged out from under his skin as he had activated his golden Arhat body. The thunderbolts unleashed by the cold electric mirror landed on his body and exploded, producing loud tinkling noises as if he was striking a huge golden bell. However, it only tore a small patch of skin on his chest, and not even a single drop of blood gushed out. However, the cold electric mirror was, after all, fused with a clump of 9 Heavens Dipper Thunder essence, and after a long period of cultivation by Wu Qi, its power had reached the level of an ordinary immortal item. Although the thunderbolts did not severely injure Guru Gu He, they had consumed a great deal of his energy. He felt a dull pain in his chest, and his vision turned dark as he was forced to hover on the spot, unable to move. Several dozens of immortal talismans exploded. Instead of using the standard method to trigger the immortal spells and divine abilities contained in the talismans, Wu Qi used the most violent and direct method to detonate them at the same time. Large sheets of white clouds, water vapor, green mist, and strong light turned into a hazy ball of light and shadow and exploded. The sharp claws unleashed by Guru Gu He were instantly ripped to shreds, while the tunnel opened up by Patriarch Yuan Hua was also destroyed by the explosion. As the immortal talismans twisted the tunnel, the chaotic airflows in the surroundings surged in a messy manner, nearly dragging Guru Gu He into the chaotic starry sky. It scared him so much that he cried out miserably, grabbing Reverend Miao Miao's ankle, who was rushing towards him. Only then did he manage to struggle out of the chaotic space. On the other hand, all the immortals who were chasing after them were blocked by the sudden collapse of the tunnel with their divine wills and visions. Because of that, the distance between them and Wu Qi became much further. Seizing the opportunity, Patriarch Yuan Hua abruptly changed his flying direction, breaking through the chaotic starry sky and flying diagonally towards it. Bringing Wu Qi and the others, Taoist Qi quickly followed behind him. He did not forget to pat Wu Qi's shoulder and praise loudly, Wu Qi, my good boy, you've done a great job. Patriarch Yuan Hua, who was busy opening up a path in the front, also praised loudly, you've done a great job. As long as we can make it through today, this immortal sword will be the cornerstone treasure of Yuan Hua sect. Excellent, excellent. I never expected Huiling to have such a precious treasure in her hand. That's why we messed up the situation. Otherwise, everything would be within our plan. Upon hearing that, Wu Qi smiled wryly. When they were having a secret discussion in Green Cliff Mountain, he did not expect this to be the result. Originally, everything had been settled. Wu Qi and the rest of the 110 disciples would defeat the disciples of Huiling sect, seizing the ownership of the Energy Stone planet. This was the first step that they should take. After that, Patriarch Yuan Hua would stay in Green Cliff Planet until Reverend Huiling issued the challenge. At that time, he would rush to the scene through the teleportation formation that he had prepared beforehand, and face the severely wounded Reverend Huiling with his uninjured body. As long as Patriarch Yuan Hua killed Reverend Huiling, Yuan Hua sect would have won the match. But, unexpectedly, the reason why Reverend Huiling had the courage to raise his bet was actually an immortal sword of 18th tier or above. It had thrown the situation into chaos, forcing the people of Yuan Hua sect to flee in panic. Furthermore, Wu Qi was curious if Patriarch Yuan Hua would use that strange little strip of cloth if Reverend Huiling did not possess this immortal sword. As the little strip of cloth was able to kill Reverend Huiling in an instant, its origin must be extraordinary. Judging from its appearance, it should be Patriarch Yuan Hua's trump card. Nevertheless, although the situation had changed, the result was still good. Yuan Hua sect had won the Huang Qiao planet justifiably. Not only had their territory doubled in size, they had also occupied the entire Energy Stone planet. With that, the future of their sect was going to be very bright. At the thought of this, no matter it was Patriarch Yuan Hua, Daoist Qi, or even Wu Qi and the other disciples of Yuan Hua sect, all of them laughed out loud, their voices filled with complacency. Not only Huang Qiao planet and the Energy Stone planet, but Patriarch Yuan Hua had also obtained an upper-grade immortal sword. With that, Yuan Hua sect would definitely be the biggest power in Puyo Heavenly Realm in the future. With a powerful sect as their backing, the future development of their disciples would be unimaginable. Suddenly, the pressure coming from the front lessened, as Patriarch Yuan Hua brought all his disciples and rushed out of the chaotic starry sky. The immortal sword in his hand suddenly let out a faint cry. Taking advantage of the moment when the item spirit was at its weakest, Patriarch Yuan Hua had forcibly branded it with his divine will. Right at this moment, a strange beam of light approached from the side. It was Reverend Yun, who had come before Patriarch Yuan Hua in a flustered and exasperated manner. Yuan Hua, how dare you kill a disciple of Eminent Cloud Sect? Reverend Yun immediately unleashed a thunderbolt. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.